He grabbed the man's wrist mid-swing, one hand, no hesitation, and the entire room went silent. A janitor. In a dirty uniform. Holding a trained attacker frozen in place, like it was nothing. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. And in that 1 second, everything people thought they knew about Michael Carter shattered. Because the man pushing a mop through these hallways for 3 years wasn't who anyone believed he was. The real question isn't how a janitor stopped 4 armed men alone. The real question is, why was he hiding in the first place? Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you're new here, subscribe. You don't want to miss what comes next. The alarm went off at 5:47 a.m. 13 minutes before it was supposed to. Michael Carter was already awake. He'd been awake since 3:15, lying on his back in the dark, staring at a ceiling he knew by memory. Every crack, every water stain. The long hairline fracture running from the light fixture toward the window that he'd been meaning to fix for 8 months and never did. He knew that ceiling the way a soldier knows a foxhole because he'd spent too many hours inside it alone, waiting for a morning that took too long to come. He reached over and killed the alarm before it could ring. Habit. The kind of habit that comes from years of not wanting to make noise, of not wanting to be heard. He sat up slowly, put his feet on the cold floor, and just breathed for a moment. In, out. That was something his old team leader, a man named Reyes, used to say when things got bad downrange. Don't think about the next hour. Don't think about the next minute. Just breathe. The breath is always real, everything else is noise. Reyes had been dead for 6 years. Michael breathed in. Michael breathed out. Then he stood up and got on with his day. By 6:15 he was in the kitchen making breakfast. Eggs scrambled the way Danny liked them, and toast cut on a diagonal, because when Danny was 4 years old, he had declared that rectangular toast was wrong, and somehow that had become a law of the household that Michael had never challenged. Danny was 8 now. He came shuffling into the kitchen in his Spider-Man socks, dragging a backpack that looked twice his size, his dark hair still smashed flat on the left side from the pillow. Dad. Yeah. It's Friday. I know. Can we get pizza tonight? Michael slid the eggs onto a plate, set the diagonal toast beside them, poured a glass of orange juice. We'll see. Danny climbed onto the kitchen stool and stared at his father with the specific, merciless focus that only 8-year-old boys are capable of. That means no. That means we'll see. Last time you said we'll see about the pizza, it was no. Last time you had a spelling test on Saturday morning, and you'd eaten 3 pieces of birthday cake at Marcus's party. That was different. That was also a we'll see. Michael set the glass down and looked at his son. Eat your breakfast. Danny stared at him for another second, gauging, calculating, deciding whether this particular battle was worth fighting, and then picked up his fork. Smart kid. He'd learned when to push and when to let it go. Michael wasn't sure if that was something he'd taught him, or something Danny had figured out on his own. Probably on his own. Danny figured out most things on his own. That thought sat in Michael's chest, the way a lot of thoughts did, quietly, heavily in a place he didn't examine too closely. He dropped Danny at his sister Karen's house by 7:30. Karen lived 20 minutes away in a neighborhood with good schools and a park with a proper swing set, and neighbors who waved to each other. She had a husband named Phil, who coached Little League and made the world's most aggressively average BBQ ribs. She had 2 kids of her own, a golden retriever named Biscuit, and a life that looked from the outside like the definition of normal. She was standing at the door when Michael's truck pulled up, holding a coffee mug, already dressed, already fully functional. Karen was always fully functional. It was one of the things Michael both admired and found quietly exhausting about her. Danny jumped out of the truck before it fully stopped, said, "Bye, Dad," over his shoulder, and was absorbed into the house in under 10 seconds. Michael watched him go. Karen watched Michael watch him go. "You look tired," she said. "I'm fine. You always say you're fine." "Because I'm always fine." She tilted her head in that way she had, the way that meant, "I'm not going to argue with you right now, but we both know you're lying," and said, "You working tonight? Double shift." She exhaled through her nose. "Michael, bills don't care about my schedule. I'm not talking about bills. I'm talking about you." She stepped forward, lowered her voice, even though Danny was already deep inside the house and couldn't hear anything. "You've been doing this for 3 years. The night shifts, the double shifts. You barely sleep. Danny asks me sometimes." She stopped. "He asks you what?" She looked at him. "He asks me why you always look like something's wrong." Michael was quiet for a moment. The morning was cool and gray, the kind of early fall morning that smelled like wet leaves and cut grass. Somewhere down the block, a dog was barking at something. "Tell him nothing's wrong," Michael said. "I can't keep telling him that." Karen. "I'm serious, Michael. He's 8. He notices things." "I know he notices things." Michael looked at the door his son had walked through. "I'm working on it." Karen clearly didn't believe him, but she also knew her brother well enough to understand when the conversation was over. She nodded once, lifted her coffee mug in a small half-salute. "Okay, drive safe." "Always do." He got back in the truck and drove away without looking in the rearview mirror. He never looked in the rearview mirror. The uniform was in his locker at work. Dark green industrial fabric, his name stitched in white thread above the breast pocket Carter. He put it on the same way he'd put on gear a decade ago, methodically, without thought. Arms through sleeves, snap the buttons, tuck the shirt. The motions were automatic. His hands didn't need instructions anymore. They just moved. Apex Horizon Technologies occupied 4 floors of a downtown high-rise, but the crown was the 40th floor. That was where the executive suites lived. The boardrooms. The glass-walled offices with views of the city that made people feel like they were standing above the world. Michael worked all 4 floors, but he spent most of his time on 40. He told himself it was because the assignments rotated, that it was just where his schedule put him. He almost believed it. The 40th floor was its own ecosystem. There were 17 executives, not counting assistants. He knew their habits better than they knew his face. He knew which ones came in early and which ones arrived at 9:45 and pretended it was 9:00. He knew which ones ate lunch at their desks and which ones disappeared for 2 hours. He knew their voices through walls. He knew which conversations were real and which ones were performances. I knew, for example, that Richard Vaughn, the vice president of strategic development, a man with a handshake like a used car salesman, and eyes that smiled 3 seconds after his mouth did, had started making phone calls from the stairwell. That wasn't nothing. People who use stairwells for phone calls are people who don't want to be heard in their offices. Michael noticed. He filed it away. He told himself it wasn't his problem. He was mopping the main corridor of the 40th floor at 9:22 p.m. when he heard the argument. Not the argument itself, just the architecture of it. The controlled fury of 2 people trying not to be heard, but failing. He recognized the voices without trying. One was Richard Vaughn. The other was Victoria Reynolds. Victoria Reynolds was, depending on who you asked, either the most impressive CEO in the tech industry or the most infuriating. She had built Apex Horizon from a 12-person startup into a billion-dollar enterprise in 9 years. She was 35 years old. She had been on the cover of 3 magazines in the last 2 years and had given a TED Talk that Michael had never watched, but had heard described more than once by employees on the 40th floor who talked about her. The way people talk about someone they're both impressed by and slightly afraid of. She was not afraid of Richard Vaughn. But tonight, she was something Michael had never seen her be before. She was rattled. He could hear it in the edges of her voice, the slight stagger in her timing, the way her sentences were coming out half a beat slower than usual, like she was choosing every word with extra care. He kept mopping. He moved the cart 6 feet closer to the wall, adjusted his angle, looked at the floor, listened. Those files didn't walk out of here on their own, Richard. Victoria, I understand you're frustrated. I'm not frustrated. I'm furious. There's a difference. A pause. The Meridian schematics. The Phase 3 prototypes. Those files were in a closed server. 3 people had access. 3. And now they're sitting in GenVault's system, which I know because I have a contact over there who had the decency to tell me. That doesn't mean, stop. Her voice dropped, and somehow that made it harder. "Don't do the thing where you manage me. Don't use that voice. I'm not one of your subordinates." Silence. Then Vaughn quieter. "What exactly are you accusing me of?" "I'm not accusing you of anything. Not yet. But I'm going to find out what happened. And when I do, Victoria." His tone shifted. Still smooth, but underneath it something colder. "You should be very careful right now. Not everything inside this company moves through you." Another silence. Longer this time. "Get out of my building," she said. "It's not just your building. Get out." Michael heard footsteps hard, deliberate, the sound of a man used to making exits on his own terms, and then a door opening and closing. He stood completely still for 3 full seconds. Then he started mopping again. He didn't sleep much that night. He never slept much. But that night was worse. He lay in the dark and thought about things he had spent 3 years not thinking about. The way Reyes used to say, pattern recognition isn't instinct, Carter. It's training. You see what others miss because you taught yourself to see. Don't switch that off just because the mission changed. The stairwell phone calls. The security camera on the northeast corridor that had started pointing 3 degrees off from its original position. He'd noticed it 2 weeks ago, told himself the maintenance crew must have bumped it. The 2 men he didn't recognize who had been on the 40th floor last Thursday evening, wearing visitor badges. But nobody had signed them in at the front desk. He'd checked the log sheet when he emptied the trash. He told himself none of it was his business. He told himself he was just a janitor. He told himself he had chosen this life, the mop, the uniform, the invisible life, because it was the safest thing for Danny. Because the other life, the real life, the life before that life, cost people around him everything. He turned over in the dark, breathed in, breathed out. Reyes is gone, he thought. Dalton is gone. 2 others. Because of a mission that you can't even talk about. Because of a call that went wrong in a country that doesn't exist on any official map. He closed his eyes. You're a janitor. MOP floors. You make scrambled eggs. You cut the toast on a diagonal. That's enough. He fell asleep somewhere around 2 a.m. and dreamed about the ocean. 3 days later, something changed. He couldn't have named exactly what. Just a shift in the atmosphere of the 40th floor. The way temperature changes before a storm. Something barometric and invisible that you feel in your bones before you see it in the sky. The executives were quieter. The assistants were nervous. 2 of the IT technicians he'd never seen before were on the floor for 4 hours working on something in the server room, and when they left, they didn't sign out. Victoria Reynolds' assistant, a sharp, precise young woman named Diana, who had never once acknowledged Michael's existence in the entire time he'd worked there, was at her desk when he came through at 7 p.m., and when he pushed his cart past her office door, she looked up and stared at him for a moment, with an expression that he couldn't quite read. Not unfriendly, just evaluating, like she was seeing him for the first time. He nodded slightly and kept moving. That was also the night he found the envelope. He found it wedged between the back of the recycling bin and the wall in the 3rd-floor supply closet. The one nobody used except Michael, because it was technically off the main corridor and required a specific janitor's key to access. It was not sealed. It was not addressed. Inside was a single piece of paper. He stood in the supply closet under the buzzing fluorescent light and read it. It wasn't a memo. It wasn't a company document. It was 7 handwritten lines, the kind of handwriting that happens when someone is writing fast and trying to be quiet about it. Phase acquisition, Thursday. RV has executive override codes. Building systems will be dark, 9:11 p.m. She won't be in the building. She will be in the building. Security has been reassigned. Whoever finds this, it matters. That was it. No signature. He read it 3 times. Then he folded it and put it in the breast pocket of his uniform, directly above his heart, and stood in the supply closet for exactly 45 seconds without moving. Old habits. When you find intelligence in the field and you're alone, you take 45 seconds. You breathe. You don't react on the spike of the first emotion. You let the information settle into the parts of your brain that are cold and analytical and have no relationship to panic. Then you assess. Phase acquisition. Thursday. Building systems dark. She won't be in the building. She will be in the building. Contradiction. Intentional. Someone wanted that contradiction on paper. RV has executive override codes. Richard Vaughn. Whoever finds this, it matters. Someone inside the building knew enough to be afraid and not enough to stop it alone. And they had put this in the only supply closet that required a janitor's key. Which meant they had wanted the janitor to find it. Which meant for reasons that made no logical sense. Whoever left this note knew something about Michael Carter that Michael Carter had never told anyone at this company. He stood very still. Thursday. Today was Tuesday. I didn't tell anyone. He thought about it. He turned it over in his mind the whole drive home through the late-night streets with the radio off and his hands exactly at 10 and 2, the way they'd been trained into his body so long ago, he couldn't drive any other way. He could call someone. There were people. There were always people for a man with his history. Names and numbers filed away in the back of his mind, like emergency exits, who would take a call from Michael Carter seriously. But making that call meant admitting what he'd found. And admitting what he'd found meant explaining how he'd found it. And explaining that meant explaining himself. And explaining himself meant bringing everything back. He parked outside Karen's house in the dark and sat in the truck for a long time. Through the window, he could see the warm yellow light of the living room. He could see Danny sitting on the couch, head bent over something. Probably a book. Danny read everything he could get his hands on with Biscuit the golden retriever sprawled across his feet. Normal. Safe. Real. You chose this, Michael thought. You chose the mop and the uniform and the nights and the diagonal toast because the other thing cost too much. Because every time you went out there, you came back with less of yourself. Because Reyes and Dalton and the others are gone, and you're still here, and you don't know why. But you do know that the only thing you can control now is whether your son grows up with a father. He sat in the dark for another 3 minutes. Then he got out of the truck and went inside. Danny was asleep on the couch, which meant Karen had tried and failed to get him to the guest bed, which was not unusual. Michael stood at the edge of the living room and looked at his son for a moment. 8 years old. 90 pounds of pure stubbornness and curiosity. He slept with his mouth slightly open and his arms flung wide in both directions, completely occupying the space in the way that only children who feel truly safe can sleep. Michael had not slept like that since he was probably 12. He reached down and picked his son up. Danny stirred, but didn't wake, just made a small protesting sound, and then went limp and carried him to the guest room. Laid him down. Pulled the blanket up. Stood there for a moment in the dark. "I'm gonna figure it out," he said quietly to no one. Or to Danny. Or to himself. Or to Reyes. Or all of them at once. Danny slept on unbothered. Michael turned off the light and went to find his sister. Karen was in the kitchen. Of course she was. It was 11:30 at night, and Karen was still in the kitchen cleaning something that probably didn't need cleaning. The same way some people pace or bite their nails. She looked up when he came in. She read his face in about 2 seconds. What happened? Nothing happened. Michael. I need to ask you something. She put down the dish towel. Okay. If I asked you to keep Danny for a couple extra days next week, no questions asked. She stared at him. No questions asked. Yeah. Michael, that's not a sentence that ends well for me. I know. I'm sorry. He looked at the kitchen table, the familiar surface with the ring stain from 100 coffee mugs and the scratch Phil had made moving the refrigerator 2 summers ago. Ordinary things. Real things. I just need to know if you could. Karen was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was careful, measured the way it got when she was trying not to say too much. Are you in trouble? No. Are you about to be in trouble? He thought about the note in his pocket. The 7 lines of handwriting. It matters. I'm about to do something, he said, that I'm not sure about yet. Karen looked at her brother the way she had looked at him since they were children, with a mixture of pride and fear, that she had never quite figured out how to express. She exhaled slowly. "Danny can stay as long as he needs to." "Thank you." "Don't thank me, just—" She stopped, started again. "Just come back in one piece." "I always do." "You always have," she said. "That's not the same thing." He couldn't argue with that. He drove home in the dark and sat at his kitchen table and pulled the note out of his pocket and read it again. "It matters." He set it flat on the table and looked at it for a long time. Outside, the city moved through its ordinary nighttime rhythms. Traffic, wind, the distant sound of a siren heading somewhere else. The kitchen was quiet. The ceiling had its crack. The refrigerator hummed. For 3 years, Michael Carter had practiced being invisible. For 3 years, he had been very good at it. He folded the note, put it back in his pocket, and went to the bedroom. He didn't sleep. He made a plan. Wednesday was a long day. He worked a full shift, and he watched everything. He watched Richard Vaughn arrive at 8:40, 15 minutes earlier than his usual time. He watched the 2 unrecognized men from last week appear again. 4th floor. This time not the 40th, wearing the same visitor badges, moving with that particular kind of casualness that isn't actually casual, that's practiced. He watched the security rotation and clocked that 2 of the regular overnight guards weren't there. Different faces. New faces. He watched Victoria Reynolds. She was in her office by 7 a.m. and didn't leave until nearly 9 p.m., and in the hours between, she cycled between controlled composure and something underneath it that Michael recognized from years of watching people under pressure. She was carrying a weight she hadn't put down. She was doing the math on something and not liking the answers she was getting. Around 4 p.m., he was running his cart past her office, and she was on the phone with her back to the door. He caught 3 words through the glass, just 3, but he caught them clearly. "Thursday, I know." And that was enough. She knew something was coming, and she was going to be in the building anyway. She won't be in the building. She will be in the building. He thought about the note again. He thought about the contradiction again. She will be in the building because she chooses to be, he thought. Because she's not the kind of woman who runs from her own fight. He thought about what that meant for a man who had spent 3 years specifically not inserting himself into other people's fights. He mopped the floor. He moved the cart. He worked the rest of his shift in silence. That night, he went home, and he did something he hadn't done in a very long time. He went to the back of his closet past the jacket he never wore, and the box of Danny's baby things he never opened, and the old duffel bag he never touched, and he stood in front of that duffel bag for about 2 minutes without moving. Then he opened it. Not all the way, just enough to reach inside and confirm that what was there was still there. It was. He zipped it back up and stood in his closet in the dark and put his forehead against the wall and breathed. In, out. "Reyes," he said to the wall, to the dark, to the memory. "I could really use some advice right now." The memory of Reyes didn't answer. It never answered. But standing there in the dark, Michael could almost hear the shape of what he would have said, that specific combination of direct and human that had made Reyes the best team leader Michael had ever worked with. "The mission doesn't choose you, Carter. You choose the mission. But sometimes the mission is already in motion before you get there. And the only real question is whether you're willing to look at what's in front of you." Michael stood in the dark for another minute. Then he went to the kitchen, sat at the table, and spent 3 hours mapping out everything he knew. Layout of every floor. Security camera positions and their current angles. Guard rotation schedules as he understood them. Building entry and exit points. Stairwell access. The conference room on 40. The big one, glass-walled, with the long oval table and the city behind it, and 2 doors, one facing the main corridor, one facing a back hallway that most people on the floor didn't even know existed because it led only to a server room and a secondary elevator that required executive keycard access. He wrote none of this down. It was all in his head, the way it had always been in his head. When he was done mapping, he sat at the table for a long time with his hands flat on the surface and looked at the ceiling and thought about Danny sleeping at Karen's house in the Spider-Man socks on the guest room bed with his arms spread wide, occupying his space, Safe. Okay, Michael Carter said to his empty kitchen. Just that, just one word. Then he got up and went to bed, and for the first time in a very long time, he actually slept. Thursday arrived, the way inevitable things always do, without ceremony, without announcement. Just suddenly there, in the way the morning is suddenly there when you open your eyes. He called Karen before he left the house. "Hey," she said. "Hey, is Danny awake? He's eating cereal and complaining about it. Can I talk to him?" A pause. Then the sound of the phone being handed over. Then Danny's voice, still hoarse from sleep. "Dad." "Hey, buddy." "Hey." A pause. "Are you okay?" The question landed strangely. Michael turned it over for a second. "Yeah, I'm good. Just wanted to say good morning." "You never call just to say good morning." "I know. I'm trying something new." He could hear Danny thinking about this. "Okay," Danny said finally, with the gravity of someone who has decided to accept an unusual development without making it weird. "Good morning, Dad." "Good morning, Danny." A pause. "You're the best thing I ever did. You know that?" Silence. Then, "Dad, are you sure you're okay? Despite everything, the note in his pocket the night ahead, the duffel bag in the back of the closet." Michael laughed. A real laugh. Short, but real. "Yeah, buddy, I'm sure. Go eat your cereal." "It's stale." "Eat it anyway." "Fine." "Love you." "Love you too, Dad." He hung up, stood in his kitchen, breathed once. Then Michael Carter put on his janitor's uniform, picked up his keys, and drove toward the building. He arrived 2 hours before his shift started. He came in through the loading dock. He had the key for it, had always had the key for it, a fact that had never seemed especially significant until now. He didn't sign the log. He didn't turn on any lights. He moved through the building the way water moves through a space, finding every gap, every low point, every path of least resistance, occupying each one without creating disturbance. He knew where the new guards were stationed. He knew which cameras were still working and which ones had been quietly redirected. He knew the secondary elevator on 40 was still operational, even though it had been marked as out of service on the building directory for the past 4 days. He pushed his cart. He moved down corridors. He was invisible. And he waited. Because Michael Carter had learned in desert heat and mountain cold, in places that don't appear on maps on missions, that don't appear in any records, that the most important thing a man can do before a fight is not prepare his body. It's prepare his mind. He moved through the 40th floor at 8:17 p.m., running a standard cleaning pass on a night when the cleaning schedule called for a different route entirely. Nobody questioned it. Nobody even noticed. He noticed everything. He noticed the 4 men who arrived on the 40th floor at 8:45 through the secondary stairwell. He noticed the way they moved, the way they positioned themselves near the conference room before Victoria Reynolds arrived. He noticed the small electronic device that one of them attached to the main corridor's security panel. He noticed Richard Vaughn arriving at 8:52, crisp and confident the way men who believe everything is going according to plan always look. He noticed Victoria Reynolds arriving at 9:01, walking down that corridor with her chin up and her eyes steady. The way a person walks when they know they're walking into something difficult, and they've decided that running is not an option. He watched her enter the conference room. He watched the doors close. He watched the security panel light go from green to red. He counted to 10. Then he picked up his mop, straightened his cart, and walked toward the conference room doors. Behind those doors, a man with too much ambition and not enough conscience was attempting to steal something that didn't belong to him. Behind those doors, a woman who had built something real was being told that real things can be taken. And outside those doors, a man in a dirty green uniform with Carter stitched above the pocket was about to make the first real choice he'd made in 3 years. He put his hand on the door. He felt the old thing rise in him. Not the fear. He hadn't felt fear in so long. He wouldn't have recognized it, but the sharpening, the narrowing, the way the world focused down to angles and distances, and the specific weight of the silence on the other side of that door. He knew what was on the other side. He'd always known. He'd been waiting 3 years to stop pretending he didn't. Michael Carter opened the door. He walked in. He was still pushing the cleaning cart. And everyone in that room. Richard Vaughn, the 4 men stationed at the walls, the frightened assistant in the corner. Victoria Reynolds, standing at the far end of that long oval table, with her hands flat on the surface and her jaw set turned, and looked at him. Richard Vaughn stared, blinked, and then slowly smiled the smile of a man who has decided that the universe has given him a gift. "Well," Vaughn said, "look at that. The janitor." He let out a short laugh. One of his men laughed too, then another. "Do you have any idea?" Vaughn said, his voice rich with a contempt he'd clearly been storing up for a very long time. "Where you are right now, what you've walked into." Michael Carter looked at him. He didn't answer immediately. He took his time. He looked at the room the way he had been trained to look at every room methodically, completely cataloging every person and every surface and every angle and every potential in the space. 4 men. Vaughn, the assistant, Victoria, 2 doors, multiple pieces of furniture, the long oval table. The window behind Victoria reinforced glass 40 floors up irrelevant. The secondary door to his left 12 feet accessible. Victoria's eyes had found him. He saw something move through them. Confusion first, and then something he wasn't expecting. Recognition, or something close to it. He looked back at Richard Vaughn. "Someone," Michael said in a voice that was very quiet and very even, and had none of the janitor in it at all, "should have told you." Vaughn raised an eyebrow. "Told me what?" "That the most dangerous man in any room," Michael said, "is usually the one you stopped looking at a long time ago." The smile on Vaughn's face held for exactly 1 more second. Then Michael Carter moved. And the room changed forever. The first man never saw it coming. That was the thing about Michael Carter, that nobody in that room understood yet, that when he moved, he didn't telegraph. There was no wind-up, no warning, no moment where his body said, "Here it comes," the way most people's bodies always do. 1 second he was standing at the door with his hand on the cleaning cart, and the next second, the nearest man. The one positioned 6 feet to Michael's right, built like a refrigerator, holding himself with the confidence of someone who has never been genuinely threatened in his professional life, was on the floor. It happened in under 2 seconds. Not a punch, not a tackle. A controlled application of force to 3 specific points on the man's body in a sequence that removed his balance, his breath, and his ability to stand in that order. The man went down without a sound, which was somehow more frightening than if he'd screamed. The room froze. Richard Vaughn's smile didn't just fade. It evacuated, leaving his face oddly blank like a screen that's lost its signal. "What?" The second man came at Michael from the left. Faster than the first, more experienced, moving with actual training behind him. Michael read it before the man completed his first step. He let the cart go, stepped inside the man's reach, which was the last thing the man expected, and used the man's own momentum against him, in a way that ended with the man's face against the conference table and his arm locked behind his back, at an angle that communicated very clearly that it could go further, and that going further would be a very bad experience. "Don't," Michael said quietly. The man didn't. Victoria Reynolds had not moved from her position at the far end of the table. Her hands were still flat on the surface, but her eyes were tracking every single thing Michael did with an intensity that had nothing to do with fear. She was watching him the way you watch something you've been trying to understand for a long time and are only now starting to see clearly. The third and fourth men exchanged a look. Then the third one reached under his jacket. Michael released the second man, moved left, put the cleaning cart between himself and the third man's line of action, reached under the cart's lower shelf, in a motion so practiced it was nearly invisible, and came up with a fire extinguisher. He had placed there 40 minutes earlier when he made his preliminary pass through the floor. He didn't use it as a weapon. He pulled the pin and discharged it directly at the third man's face. White chemical cloud. Immediate disorientation. The man stumbled back, Eyes blinded the weapon he'd been reaching for, completely forgotten in the reflexive panic of a man whose face is suddenly covered in fire suppressant at close range. Michael was already moving to the fourth man. The fourth man was the smart one. Michael had clocked that from the beginning, the way he'd positioned himself, not at the wall, but near the secondary door. The way his eyes had been moving around the room, rather than fixing on Michael, the way he had not come forward with the others. Smart. Disciplined. Trained. Michael respected it. It didn't change the outcome. They engaged for about 8 seconds. Real engagement. Two men who both knew what they were doing, reading each other and responding each one a half step ahead of what the other expected, and then a half step behind, back and forth in that compressed, violent conversation that people who've never been in actual combat can't fully understand. It wasn't clean. It wasn't cinematic. Michael took a hit to his ribs that he registered and filed, and didn't feel yet wouldn't feel until tomorrow. He knew the rhythm of it, and he used the momentum of that hit to redirect himself into a position that put him behind the fourth man, with his arm around the man's throat, in a controlled hold that wasn't about damage. It was about stillness. Everything went still. The first man was still on the floor. The second was at the table holding his arm, not going anywhere. The third was against the wall with the chemical residue on his face, coughing, eyes streaming. The fourth was stationary in Michael's grip. 4 seconds of silence. Then Richard Vaughn said in a voice that was working very hard to remain in control, "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" Michael looked at him across the room. "Release the pin on a fire extinguisher," Michael said, "among other things. You have assaulted 4 people, in a private corporate building. You're a janitor. You will be arrested. You will go to prison. You have nothing, no lawyer, no resources, no—" "Richard." Victoria's voice cut through the room like a blade. She had finally moved. She was standing straight, shoulders back, and the rattle that had been in her voice the night before was completely gone. What was there instead? Instead was something cold and clear and entirely in command. "Stop talking." Vaughn looked at her. "Victoria." "I said stop." She looked at Michael. "Are you okay?" The question surprised him. Most people in her position would be asking who he was, what was happening, whether they were safe. She was asking if he was okay. "Fine," he said. "The rib." He glanced at her. "Fine. You're going to feel that tomorrow." "I know." Something moved through her expression, not quite a smile, but the shape of one. "Okay." She looked at the man in Michael's grip. "You. What's your name?" The man said nothing. "Doesn't matter," she said. "You're all going to be in a very small room answering questions for a very long time, so you can start practicing silence now if you like." She turned to Vaughn. "Richard, where's the drive?" Vaughn's jaw tightened. "I don't know what you're talking about." "The external drive your people brought into the server room 2 days ago, the one with the copied files on it. Where is it?" "There's no drive." "Richard." "Victoria, you don't know what you think you know. I know exactly what I know." She took 3 steps toward him, which brought her to the center of the room, which put her closer to Vaughn, but also closer to Michael, and Michael wasn't sure whether she'd calculated that, or whether it was instinct. Either way, it told him something. "I have been watching you for 9 months. Do you understand that 9 months? Every file you touched, every system you accessed, every after-hours conversation you had in that stairwell where you thought nobody could hear you." Vaughn's face shifted. "The stairwell," he said slowly. "Sound carries in stairwells," Victoria said, "especially to people who are paying attention." Vaughn looked from Victoria to Michael. Something moved behind his eyes, the specific recalculation of a man who has just realized that 2 things he believed to be unconnected are in fact the same thing. "You," he said to Michael. "You've been watching me." "I mop floors," Michael said. "You've been watching me for months." "I mop floors," Michael said again in exactly the same tone. Vaughn made a sound that was almost a laugh. It came out wrong. "Who are you?" Michael didn't answer. Vaughn looked at the 4 men, one down, one injured, one against the wall, one in a chokehold, and the calculation behind his eyes shifted again. Michael watched it happen. Watched the man move from confrontation to contingency the way experienced manipulators do, fast and fluid like water finding a new channel. "Okay," Vaughn said. His voice smoothed out. He straightened his jacket. "Okay, let's all slow down." Nobody moved. "This doesn't have to be a disaster," Vaughn continued. "Victoria, listen to me. There's a way out of this that works for everyone. The company has been mismanaged, not by you intentionally, but structurally. The board knows it. The investors know it. What I've been doing, the conversations, the planning, it's not what you think. I was trying to protect the company's future. By stealing our proprietary technology," Victoria said. "By creating leverage." He said it like it was reasonable. Genvault was going to make a hostile move regardless. What I was doing was negotiating a position before the attack came. I was protecting us. Victoria looked at him for a long moment. "You're remarkable," she said. "Victoria, I mean that in the worst possible way." She turned to Michael. "The drive. I think it's in the server room. Can you—" She stopped herself, looked at him differently. "Sorry. That's a strange question to ask a—" "I'll find it," Michael said. He released the fourth man carefully, precisely maintaining enough control in the release that the man understood getting up quickly was not a good idea, and looked at the room. He needed someone to hold position here while he moved. He looked at Victoria's assistant, who had been standing against the far wall this entire time, pressed back into the corner with both hands over her mouth. She was young, mid-20s, and she was clearly terrified, but she was also still standing upright, and her eyes were tracking everything, and she hadn't made a sound or tried to run, which told Michael she had more composure than she was being given credit for. "Hey," Michael said. She looked at him. "What's your name?" "Diana," she said. Her voice was small but steady. "Diana, I need you to do something." "Okay," she said, just like that, no hesitation. He pointed to the room phone on the credenza near the window. "Call the building's main security line, not the extension, the external number. Tell them there's an emergency on the 40th floor. Tell them to send every available person and to call the police. Can you do that?" "Yes." "Don't let anyone leave this room." Diana looked at Richard Vaughn, who was significantly larger than she was, and had 4 men behind him, albeit 4 men in various states of incapacitation. She looked at him for about 2 seconds with an expression that Michael could only describe as the look of a person who has been professionally dismissed for years and is deeply tired of it. "Okay," she said. She walked to the credenza and picked up the phone. Michael moved. The server room was through the secondary door and down a short corridor 40 feet 2 corners. He knew the layout from his cleaning passes. He knew the lock on the server room was a keycard system, and he knew that the keycard system had been overridden as part of whatever they'd done to the building's electronics tonight, which meant the door might be open. It was open. He moved inside. The room was cold. Server rooms always are, and loud in that particular way, that server farms are loud. A dense white noise that swallows all the other sounds. He moved through the rows systematically, not searching randomly, moving to the specific unit that he had flagged in his mental map 3 days ago. The unit that 2 men had been working on for 4 hours on a night when no maintenance was scheduled. He found it in under 90 seconds. The drive was taped to the back of a cooling unit, small, black, the size of a deck of cards, held in place with 2 strips of ordinary electrical tape. Amateur concealment. The kind of thing someone does when they're more confident than careful. He pulled it free. Held it. On it was everything Vaughn had stolen. 9 months of Victoria's work. The Meridian schematics. The Phase 3 prototypes. The financial architecture of a billion-dollar company being quietly handed to a rival. He stood in the cold room and held a very small piece of plastic that represented a very large act of betrayal. He thought about the note he'd found. It matters. Someone inside this building had known, had been watching, had been afraid and unable to stop it alone, and had left a message in the one place they thought the right person might find it. He had a thought he hadn't allowed himself to have, yet someone in this building knew who he was. He put the drive in his breast pocket next to where the note had been and went back. When he came through the secondary door into the conference room, the scene had shifted. Victoria was on her phone real signal now, which meant Diana's call to security had prompted some kind of system restore, or the lockdown had had a specific time limit that had now expired. Vaughn was sitting in a chair with his jacket still perfectly arranged, and his expression doing the thing expressions do when the person wearing them is working very hard on their next move. Two of Michael's 4 men were also sitting. The third was still near the wall. The fourth was standing but making no attempt to do anything with that standing. Diana was near the credenza with the phone in her hand and her chin up. Michael walked to Victoria and held out the drive. She looked at it, then at him. She took it from his hand with both of hers and held it the way you hold something you weren't sure you'd ever get back. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me yet," Michael said. "Vaughn has partners outside this building, people who were supposed to receive a transfer tonight. When it doesn't come, they're going to start asking questions." She nodded. She already knew. "I'm making calls." He also... Michael stopped. Something had changed. It was a small thing. The kind of thing that nobody else in the room would have noticed. The fourth man, the smart one, the disciplined one, had shifted his weight. Barely. 3 degrees to the left. And his eyes had moved to Vaughn just for a half second, in the way eyes move when receiving a signal. Michael turned. Vaughn was standing, and in his hand was a phone. Not a weapon, just a phone. But his thumb was moving on the screen with the specific purpose of someone who has one action left and is doing it right now. Michael crossed the room in 4 steps, covered the distance faster than Vaughn anticipated, and took the phone from his hand before the call connected. Vaughn grabbed for it. Michael simply wasn't there when the grab arrived. He stepped to the side and held the phone up and looked at the screen. A number. No name. International code he recognized. He looked at Vaughn. "Who is this?" Michael asked. Vaughn straightened up. Something had gone out of him, the performance of control, the careful management of the room, and what was left underneath it was older and harder and more honest. "None of your business." "Who is this number, Richard?" "You're a janitor." The contempt was back, but it was different now. Defensive. "You have no authority here. You have no—" "The men you hired tonight," Michael said. "The 4 of them, they're not from a private security company. Their training is specific, and their movement discipline is specific, and the specific thing it is," he paused, "is military, Eastern European school, which means they were contracted through a network, and the network's coordinator," he looked at the phone again, "would have a phone number with this country code." The room was very quiet. Vaughn stared at him. Victoria had stopped moving. Even Diana had gone still. "You're not just stealing technology," Michael said. "You're selling it internationally, to a foreign competitor with government connections." He let that sit. "That's not corporate espionage, Richard. That's a different category of crime." Vaughn's mouth opened, closed. Something genuine moved across his face for the first time all night. Not fear exactly. The thing that comes before fear when a man realizes that the ground he was standing on was never as solid as he thought. "Who are you?" he said again. But the question had changed. It wasn't rhetorical anymore. It wasn't contemptuous. It was real. Michael handed the phone to Victoria, looked at Vaughn. "I told you already," Michael said. "Someone you shouldn't have ignored." Police arrived on the 40th floor at 10:47 p.m. Michael counted 6 officers in the first wave, 2 in plainclothes federal, from the look of them responding to something more than a standard dispatch call, which meant Victoria's phone calls had reached the right people faster than he'd expected, or she was more connected than he'd given her credit for, which told him something about her that he filed away for later. Howe was standing near the secondary door when they came through the main entrance, and he watched the room absorb their arrival, the way all rooms absorb the arrival of official authority. Everything that had been in motion, stopping everyone finding a position, the air itself changing. One of the plainclothes officers, a woman mid-40s with the focused eyes of someone who processes scenes fast and makes decisions faster, swept the room and landed on Michael almost immediately. She looked at the 4 men in their various states of defeat. She looked at Vaughn in his chair. She looked at Michael in his janitor's uniform standing slightly apart from everything. She walked over to him. "You're Carter," she said. The question landed wrong. He'd expected "Who are you?" or "What happened here?" not his name. "Depends on who's asking," he said. She showed him a badge. Federal. "Agent Marsh. We got a call about this building 20 minutes before the 911 came in. From a secondary source." She held his eyes. "A source that mentioned your name specifically?" "The secondary source. The note. Whoever finds this, it matters." "Someone tipped you," he said. "Someone tipped us," she confirmed. "Took us a while to take it seriously. The source was unconventional." "What does that mean?" She studied him for a moment, deciding how much to say. "The person who contacted us did so through a channel that most people don't know exists. A channel that was set up specifically for former Special Operations personnel to report credible threats anonymously." She paused. "That channel hasn't been used in about 4 years. When it was used tonight, some people who knew you paid attention." Michael didn't move. He kept his face neutral. But something in his chest shifted, something that had been sealed for a very long time, cracking open at the edge. Someone had used the channel Reyes had told him about. The channel the team had established as a last resort. The channel that, as far as Michael had known for 6 years, nobody was left alive to use. "Who used it?" he said. His voice was very level. Too level. He could hear it himself. Agent Marsh looked at him steadily. "That's a question for a different conversation." She glanced around the room. "Right now, I need to understand what happened here in the last 2 hours." He gave it to her. Clean, ordered, precise. Objective statement of event sequence, relevant observations. He left nothing out. He gave her Vaughn, the 4 men, the drive, the international phone number, the connection to the foreign network. He gave her everything. She listened without interrupting, which was how he knew she was good at her job. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then, the drive. Victoria stepped forward and held it out. Agent Marsh took it, examined it, passed it to a technician who had materialized behind her. "Mr. Carter," Agent Marsh said, "I'm going to need you to stay in the building for a few more hours." "I know. I'm also going to need to ask you some questions about your background. Some of what you described tonight suggests a level of training that—" "I know," he said again. She studied him. "You're not surprised by any of this." "I've been expecting something like tonight for a while," he said. "Not this specifically, but something." "And you didn't report it?" He looked at her. "I reported it tonight." She held his gaze for a moment. Then she nodded once, in the way people nod when they understand something that doesn't need to be said. "All right." She moved to turn away, then stopped. "Carter, the person who used the channel. Whoever it was, they knew your name. They said you'd handle it." She paused. They were right. She walked away. Michael stood near the secondary door and breathed. The room was full now. Officers, technicians, the shuffle and noise of official proceedings taking over the space where 40 minutes ago everything had been controlled. Silence, and the understanding that the only thing standing between Victoria Reynolds and the end of everything she had built was a man in a dirty green uniform. Vaughn was being walked toward the main corridor by 2 officers. He passed within 10 feet of Michael. He didn't look at him. He was looking at the floor with the expression of a man who has been running one version of events in his head for months and has just seen a different version arrive, and it is not a version that works well for him. The 4 men were being processed separately. Diana was giving her statement to a young officer near the window, her voice steady and precise, clearly walking through events in order. She was doing better than most people would do. She caught Michael's eye across the room and gave him a look that was somewhere between gratitude and a kind of fierce recognition. He gave her a small nod. Victoria was in the corner with Agent Marsh and 2 other people. Michael didn't recognize, but read as board level, from the way they were carrying the conversation, the body language of people, managing narrative, not processing events. Victoria was talking, but also listening, and doing both with that same focused control that Michael had now watched for enough hours to understand was not a performance. It was who she actually was. At 11:23 p.m. Victoria crossed the room to where Michael was standing. She stopped about 3 feet away. She was holding the small evidence bag that the drive had been placed in. She looked at it for a second, then looked at him. "Somebody in this building knew about you," she said, "before tonight." "Apparently." "I didn't." "I know." She looked at him. "Were you watching me, or were you watching Vaughn?" "Both," he said. "Mostly Vaughn, but both." She absorbed this. "For how long?" "About 3 months of active monitoring," he said. "Before that pattern observation, maybe 8 months total." 8 months. She exhaled. "And you didn't say anything?" "I wasn't certain." "But you were certain enough to be here tonight?" "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. Around them, the room continued its organized processing of catastrophe. "The man you were," she said, "before the janitor job, before all of this." She said it carefully, not pushing, leaving him space. "What happened?" He looked at her. He thought about what to say, and decided on the simplest true version. "I lost people. On a mission. And I decided that no mission was worth that again." She held his eyes. "But you came back tonight." "Tonight was different." "How?" He thought about Danny and the Spider-Man socks. He thought about Reyes. He thought about the note, "It matters." He thought about the channel, and whoever had used it, and the fact that somewhere out there was a name he didn't know yet. A name connected to a past he'd tried to bury that had apparently been watching over him in the dark for years without his knowledge. Tonight had a face, he said. Someone real, something real, not a mission objective, not an operation. Someone standing in front of armed men because she built something and she wasn't going to let it be taken. Victoria looked at him for a long moment. "You could have gone home," she said. "You had the information. You could have called it in anonymously and gone home." "Yeah," he said. "Why didn't you?" He thought about Karen's voice. "Just come back in one piece." He thought about Danny asking if he was okay. He thought about standing in the parking lot outside Karen's house, looking through the window at his son, and telling himself that quiet was enough, that invisible was enough, that a man who had done what he had done could trade it in for scrambled eggs and diagonal toast and a ceiling crack he'd been meaning to fix for 8 months. He thought about how long he'd been lying to himself. "Because it was the right thing to do," he said. "And I've been a long time away from doing the right thing." Something in her expression changed. Not surprise. Something older than surprise. Recognition, maybe. The kind you feel when someone says something you've been thinking and haven't put into words. She held out her hand. He shook it. "My name is Victoria Reynolds," she said. "Michael Carter," he said. "I know," she said. And the way she said it told him that she knew more than she was saying, and that there was a conversation still ahead of them that neither of them was ready for tonight. That was all right. Tonight had been enough. He was still standing at 11:55 p.m. when his phone rang. Karen's name on the screen. He stepped out into the corridor and answered. "Hey," he said. "It's midnight," Karen said. "Danny asked if you called from work." "Yeah, there was a situation." "A situation." A pause. "Are you in one piece?" "Yes." "Are you in trouble?" "No." "Are you sure?" He stood in the corridor of the 40th floor of a building where an hour ago 4 armed men and a man who thought he owned the world had discovered what they should have known the moment they walked in. He touched his breast pocket where the drive had been, where the note had been before that. "Karen," he said. "What?" "Tell Danny I'll see him in the morning. And tell him—" He stopped. Started again. "Tell him his dad is starting to remember who he is." Silence on the line. Then, "He's going to ask me what that means." "Tell him it's a good thing." "Is it?" He breathed in. He breathed out. "Yeah," Michael Carter said. "It is." He hung up. Stood alone in the corridor. The city was 40 floors below him, moving in its ordinary rhythms, lit up and indifferent and real. Somewhere in it, his son was sleeping in Spider-Man socks with his arms spread wide, claiming his space in the world without apology, the way safe children sleep. Michael turned and went back into the room. There was still work to do. There was always still work to do. But for the first time in 3 years, he walked toward it instead of AW. The interrogation room on the 14th floor of the federal building downtown smelled like bad coffee and old carpet, and Michael Carter had been sitting in it for 3 hours before anyone came in who actually wanted to talk. Not that the waiting bothered him. He had waited in worse places. He had waited in silence in mountain cold with nothing between him and the wind but a thin layer of tactical gear, and the knowledge that moving too early was the same as not moving at all. 3 hours in a government building with a cup of mediocre coffee and fluorescent lights was practically comfortable by comparison. Agent Marsh came in at 2:14 a.m. She was carrying a folder and a fresh cup of coffee which she set in front of him without asking if he wanted it. He did. He drank it. She sat across from him, opened the folder, and said nothing for about 10 seconds. He let her. This was a technique, the silence before the first question, designed to make the subject fill the space. He had used it himself in another life. He waited her out. She looked up. "Commander Michael Carter," she said. Not a question. "Navy SEAL, Team 6, 10 years active, 12 classified deployments, removed from public record following Operation Hollow Ground 6 years ago." She looked at him. "I've never actually met someone whose file begins with a federal classification warning." "It's less interesting than it sounds," Michael said. "That's genuinely hard to believe given last night." She set the folder down. "You want to tell me how a man with your record ends up mopping floors in a corporate high-rise? I wanted a quiet life. And the janitor job seemed like the best path to that. I'm good at being invisible." She studied him. "You were. Until last night you were spectacular at it. 3 years at that building and we have zero record of you in any security database, any watch list, any professional registry. You used a name, but not your real background. You passed employment screening because whoever processed it didn't go deep enough." She paused. "Or because someone made sure they didn't." Something shifted in the room. Small. But Michael caught it. "What does that mean?" he said. Marsh looked at him steadily. "Someone has been running interference on your civilian life for 3 years. Nothing aggressive. Nothing that would have drawn attention. Just quiet, consistent management of the spaces around you, making sure the right doors were open, the wrong questions weren't asked." Michael set the coffee cup down. "Who, that Marsh said, is part of what I need to talk to you about." She pulled a second sheet from the folder and turned it toward him. "Do you recognize this name?" He looked at the paper. His hands stayed flat on the table. His face stayed neutral. His breathing stayed even. But inside his chest, something that had been sealed for 6 years made a sound like a lock turning. The name on the paper was Reyes. Not just Reyes. A full name. Marcus Reyes. With a photograph. The photograph showed a man who was alive. Michael looked at the photograph for a long time. "He's dead," Michael said. His voice came out level. He was proud of that. "Marcus Reyes died on hollow ground. I watched." He stopped. "He was declared KIA. I saw the confirmation." "You saw a confirmation that was produced for operational security purposes," Marsh said carefully. "Mr. Reyes did not die on hollow ground. He was critically wounded, extracted under a parallel operation that you were not informed of, and spent 11 months in a military medical facility before making a recovery that his physicians described as, quote, unreasonable." The room was very quiet. Michael's mind moved through it, the way it moved through tactical situations. Fast, clean, stripping out emotion to find the operational facts. Except this time, the operational facts were personal, in a way that tactical situations never were, and the stripping out of emotion was not working the way it was supposed to. "He's alive," Michael said. "He's alive. He's been living under a managed identity for 5 years. And for 3 of those 5 years..." Marsh paused. "He's been near you, near me. He's been in Chicago, different neighborhood, different life. He knew where you were. He's the one who made sure your employment screening didn't go too deep. He's the one who's been running interference." She held his eyes. "And he's the one who used the channel last night." Michael sat back. 3 years. 3 years of sleeping badly and dreaming about the ocean and telling himself that the men who were gone were gone. That there was nothing left of that life except the weight of it, that the silence he carried was the correct response to a world that had taken everything and left him with a son and a mop and a ceiling crack he'd been meaning to fix. 3 years. And Marcus Reyes had been 20 minutes away the whole time. "Why didn't he contact me directly?" Michael asked. "He didn't think you were ready," Marsh said. His words, not mine. Something hot moved through Michael's chest. Not anger. The thing that comes before anger when the truth is more complicated than the emotion. "He didn't think I was ready," he said, and I'm quoting directly from his communication to us, which I have here if you want to read it. "Carter needed time to find out if he could be something other than what we made him. If I'd walked up to his door, he would have spent the next 3 years being my old teammate instead of his son's father. He needed to do that first." Marsh paused. He also said that when the moment came where being both was unavoidable, Carter would figure it out. Michael looked at the table. "I thought about Danny asking Dad did something happen today. He thought about what he'd said. Yeah. I remembered who I was." Marcus Reyes apparently had known that moment was coming before Michael did. He exhaled slowly through his nose. "Where is he?" "That's actually why you're here." Marsh closed the folder. "Because last night opened something up, Carter. The network Vaughn was connected to the foreign contractors, the international number on his phone. We've been watching that network for 2 years. We thought we knew its shape. Last night told us we were wrong." She looked at him. Vaughn wasn't just selling technology. He was the domestic end of a much larger operation. And the people at the other end of that operation are now aware that their domestic pipeline just collapsed. "Which means they'll move," Michael said. "Which means they'll move. Quickly. We have a window narrow, maybe 48 hours to leverage what we recovered last night before they restructure." She leaned forward slightly. "There are 3 people in this city who know this network well enough to help us do that. One of them is sitting in a federal holding cell. One of them is in a military hospital in Germany." She stopped. "And the third," Michael said, "has been hiding in a building on the north side of the city for 5 years, Marsh said, and would like to see you." The address was in a neighborhood Michael knew not because he'd been there recently, but because he'd driven through it once almost 2 years ago on a Sunday afternoon when Danny had wanted to see the lake and Michael had taken the long way and found himself on a street that felt familiar in a way he hadn't examined too closely. He understood now why it had felt familiar. He understood now that Reyes had probably watched him drive past. He understood now that the life he'd been living as a closed system had been the whole time watched over from a distance by a man who understood something about Michael Carter that Michael Carter had not yet understood about himself. He wasn't sure yet whether that made him angry or grateful. Maybe both. Maybe the distinction didn't matter. It was 3:30 a.m. when the federal car dropped him on the corner. The street was empty. The city at this hour had a particular quality stripped back to its essential sounds. The traffic gone, the performance of daytime life suspended, just the hum of infrastructure and the distant rhythm of the lake 2 blocks east. He stood on the corner for a moment. Then he walked to the door. He knocked. 30 seconds. The door opened. The man standing there was different from the man in Michael's memory, which he'd known intellectually, but still wasn't prepared for. Broader across the shoulders somehow. More settled. A scar along the left side of his jaw that hadn't been there before. More gray in his hair than should have arrived in 6 years. The eyes were the same dark attentive, the specific quality of alertness that never fully turns off in men who've lived that kind of life. Marcus Reyes looked at Michael Carter. Michael Carter looked at Marcus Reyes. Neither of them said anything for about 5 seconds. Then Reyes said, "You look terrible." "You're supposed to be dead," Michael said. "I get that a lot." He stepped back from the door. "Come in." The apartment was clean and sparse. A couch, a table, a laptop, a bookshelf with actual books. The window over the table looked out toward the lake, and at this hour, the lake was a dark presence, rather than a visible one. You could sense it more than see it. Michael stood in the center of the room and didn't sit down. "How long?" he said. "How long have you known where I was?" Reyes didn't flinch from it. "Since month 2. 3 years. 3 years. And you watched me mop floors. I watched you build something, Reyes said. You had a son who needed a father. You needed to be a father for a while. That was more important than anything else. You could have told me you were alive. I know. Reyes. Michael's voice came out harder than he intended. Not quite anger. The thing adjacent to it. You were my team leader. You were for a long time, you were the person I... He stopped. Started again. I spent 6 years carrying the weight of hollow ground. I spent 6 years believing that my call got people killed. That the fault was mine. That the fault was not yours. Reyes's voice was very clear, very direct. The voice he used when something was not negotiable. The intelligence was bad. The extraction window was wrong. Command made 2 decisions on hollow ground that they have never officially acknowledged, and both of those decisions created the situation that went sideways. Not you. Not your call. Theirs. The room was quiet. You've known that for 6 years, Michael said. I've known it longer than that. And you didn't. I was legally restricted from communicating it, for 3 years. The classification level on hollow ground prevented any direct outreach. When that restriction lifted, I was still in recovery, medical, psychological. You know what that looks like. Michael did know what that looked like. When I was clear enough to reach out, Reyes continued, I found you. And what I found was a man who had made himself invisible because he believed he didn't deserve to be seen. And I thought, he paused. I thought that calling you up and telling you the truth about hollow ground would help. And then I thought about what you'd do with it. You'd feel better for about a week. And then you'd go back to the same pattern, because the problem wasn't the information. The problem was that you'd built a life around the shape of your own guilt, and you needed to find your way out of that on your own. By mopping floors. By being a father. By building something quiet. By getting to a place where you could choose to be more than the weight you were carrying. He met Michael's eyes. Last night you chose. I didn't engineer that. That was yours. Michael stood in the apartment in the middle of the night and looked at the man he had mourned for 6 years and tried to organize everything he was feeling into something he could hold. He couldn't. There was too much of it. The channel, he said. You used the channel. When Vaughn's network started moving against the building, I had a decision to make. Let it play out and watch you navigate it alone, or give you backup the only way I could without compromising your cover. He paused. I also contacted Marsh. Told her what was coming, and told her who was in that building. She said someone told her I'd handle it. You always handled it, Reyes said simply, even when you didn't think you could. The silence between them was different from the beginning of the conversation. Less confrontation. Something had been opened, and the pressure had equalized. Michael finally sat down. He sat on the couch and put his elbows on his knees and looked at the floor and breathed. In, out. The way Reyes had taught him back when breathing with intention was something he had to learn, and not something that came naturally. Danny asked me the other day why I always look sad when I come home from work, Michael said. Reyes sat in the chair across from him. What did you tell him? Nothing. I didn't have an answer. And now? Michael thought about it. Now I'd tell him that sometimes people carry things that belong to the past into the present because they don't know where else to put them. And that when you finally figure out where to put it down, you stop looking sad. Reyes was quiet for a moment. That's a good answer. It's 6 years late. Better than never. The sun was starting at the edges of the sky when Marsh arrived at the apartment with 2 other agents and a tablet showing the structure of the network they were up against. The window was 48 hours. The elements they had the drive. Vaughn's phone data. The identities of the 4 contractors gave them a partial map. Reyes had another piece of the map from his 5 years of watching. Together those pieces could be made into something usable. Michael sat at the table and looked at the map. He hadn't sat at a table like this in 6 years. The strange thing was how natural it felt. Not comfortable natural. The difference between something you enjoy and something you're built for. Vaughn's international contact, Marsh said, pulling up a profile on the tablet. His name is Orhan Vazir, Hungarian national currently operating out of Vienna. His legitimate business is technology acquisitions. His illegitimate business. She turned the tablet toward Michael and Reyes. Is exactly what you'd expect. Michael looked at this profile. At the photograph. A man in his 50s with the appearance of a comfortable European businessman and the eyes of someone who had never had a comfortable day in his professional life. He knew about the timeline, Michael said. He would have expected a transfer last night, when it didn't come. He's already moved, Reyes said. I'd put money on it. He won't run yet, Michael said. He'll try to understand what happened first. He'll want to know if Vaughn is in custody, if the drive is recovered, what the exposure level is. He'll spend the next 12 hours gathering information before he makes any structural changes. Which gives us 12 hours to feed him the wrong information, Marsh said. Michael looked at her. That's the play, he said. That's one version of the play. She held his eyes. There's a more direct version, but that version requires someone with a specific kind of skill set, not federal agents, not someone who can be officially connected to this operation. The room was quiet. Reyes looked at Michael. Michael looked at Marsh. You want me, he said. I want you to consult, Marsh said carefully. Advise. Provide operational guidance. Nothing that requires active engagement. Consult, Michael repeated. With significant field proximity, she admitted. He looked at Reyes. And you. I'm already in it, Reyes said. Have been for 2 years. You've been working with them for 2 years. Technically, I'm a contractor. Of course you are. The ghost of a smile moved across Reyes's face. The same smile Michael remembered from 100 impossible situations, the one that meant, yes, this is insane, and yes, we're doing it anyway. Michael looked at this tablet. He looked at the map. He looked at the 48-hour window drawn across the top of the operational brief. He thought about the drive, about Victoria standing at the end of that table with her hands flat on the surface and her jaw set, refusing to run from her own fight. He thought about Diana picking up the phone without hesitation. He thought about Vaughn's expression when the ground turned out to be different from what he'd been standing on. I thought about what he'd said to Reyes. Sometimes people carry things that belong to the past into the present because they don't know where else to put them. The thing about that sentence was that it had 2 sides. Yes, you put down the weight. But you don't walk away from what the weight taught you. You don't pretend those 10 years of capability and training and experience don't exist because they're inconvenient for the quiet life you're trying to live. You figure out how to carry it differently. I need to make a call first, Michael said. He stepped away from the table and dialed Karen. She picked up on the second ring, which meant she hadn't slept, which meant she'd been waiting. Michael. Hey. It's 6 in the morning. I know. I'm sorry. A pause. Are you in one piece? Yes. Karen, I need you to do something for me. Another no questions asked. Kind of. When Danny wakes up, tell him I might be a couple more days. Tell him... He stopped. Collected. Tell him his dad is doing something important. Silence. Then Karen said very quietly, Is this you going back? He thought about how to answer that. It's me figuring out that going back and going forward might be the same direction. Karen made a sound that was not quite crying and not quite a laugh. Michael. I know. You're an impossible person. I know. Danny's going to be fine. He's going to ask about you every 3 hours, but he'll be fine. A pause. You be fine too. Working on it. He hung up. Stood still for a moment, then walked back to the table and sat down. Okay, he said to Marsh. Okay. What do you need? She looked at him. Can you walk me through the layout of Apex Horizon's server infrastructure? If Vaziri has a secondary access route into their system. He does, Michael said. There were 2 devices, not one. I found the drive. There was a second entry point I didn't have time to address last night. The room shifted. Marsh leaned forward. Where? 3rd floor server room, northeast rack. There's a relay device that piggybacks on the building's legitimate outbound traffic. It's been there for at least a week." He paused. "I saw it during a cleaning pass and flagged it in my head and didn't act on it because I was still pretending it wasn't my problem." Marsh looked at him. "Can we use that relay feed false data through it so Vasari thinks the transfer succeeded?" Michael thought about it. "You'd need someone who understands the encoding. Vaughn's people set it up for a specific format." "I have someone," Marsh said. "She was already moving, already making the call, already putting the pieces into position with the organized urgency of someone who has been waiting for this window to open." Reyes looked at Michael across the table. "How does it feel?" Reyes said. "What? Being back at a table like this?" Michael considered the question seriously because Reyes had always deserved serious answers. "Strange," he said, "but not wrong." "That's how I felt too," Reyes said. "At first." "When does the strange part stop?" "When you stop expecting it to feel like it used to. It's different now, different reasons, different stakes." He looked at the map on the table. "Better stakes if you ask me." Michael looked at the map too, at the shape of the thing they were up against. Not a clean operation, not a mission with defined parameters and a clear extraction window. Something more complicated with more moving parts in a world he'd chosen to leave and was now choosing with eyes open to partially return to. Different stakes. I thought about Reyes saying you needed to be a father for a while first. And he thought about the fact that being a father hadn't stopped, wasn't going to stop. He would still be making scrambled eggs tomorrow morning and cutting toast on a diagonal and arguing about pizza on Fridays. That wasn't going away. It just wasn't all there was anymore. At 7 a.m. Marsh got a call that made her put the phone down slowly and look at both of them with an expression that sat at the intersection of professional and personal. "Vasari moved," she said. "How long ago?" Michael said. 3 hours. He didn't run. He went toward." She turned the tablet around. "He's in the country. He arrived at O'Hare 2 hours ago on a private charter. He's in Chicago." The room processed this. "He came here," Reyes said. "Not a question." "He came here," Marsh confirmed. "Which means he doesn't know what we know yet. He thinks the pipeline is compromised but not burned. He thinks he can fix it in person." She looked at Michael. "Which changes everything." "It changes the timeline," Michael said. 48 hours just became 24. "Less," Marsh said. "The moment he talks to any of Vaughn's people, even through a lawyer, he'll know the picture. Once he knows the picture, he disappears." "So we have until he talks to Vaughn," Michael said. "We have until about noon," Marsh said. "Vaughn has an attorney consultation scheduled for 11:30. We can't legally block it." Michael looked at the clock on the wall. 7:04 a.m. Less than 5 hours. He looked at Reyes. Reyes looked at him. For a fraction of a second, it was 6 years ago, and they were sitting across from each other before a mission with an impossible timeline and the specific understanding between two people who have operated in the dark together. That words are mostly unnecessary, that the question and the answer move between them in the silence. Then Reyes said, "You still drive the same truck?" "Yes." "That truck is loud." "I know. I've been meaning to fix the exhaust." "Classic Carter." Reyes stood up. "We take my car." Michael stood, looked at Marsh. "You're going to tell me this has to be handled through official channels." "Officially," Marsh said, "I am about to step out of this room for the next 3 hours to deal with a separate matter. Officially, I have no knowledge of what two private citizens might choose to do in the meantime." She paused. "Unofficially, Vasari is staying at the Meridian Hotel downtown, 12th floor. The name on the reservation is Henrik Bosch. He arrived with 2 people. No weapons cleared customs, but that means exactly nothing." She looked at both of them. "Don't do anything I can't explain," she said. "We never do anything you can't explain," Reyes said. "That's a lie," she said. "But I appreciate the spirit of it." She walked out. Michael stood in the apartment with the early morning coming through the window and looked at the man who had been dead for 6 years and was standing there in real-life car keys in hand, the same impossible situation smile on his face that meant, "Yes, we're doing this." Something in Michael's chest that had been clenched for a very long time released. Not everything. Not all at once. But enough. Enough to breathe differently. Enough to move. "Marcus," he said. Reyes looked at him. "I'm glad you're not dead." Reyes was quiet for a second. Then, "Yeah, me too." He held up the keys. "You ready?" Michael Carter picked up his jacket. "Let's go," he said. Reyes drove the way. He always had fast, but controlled, never reckless. Every lane, change, deliberate, his eyes moving between the road and the mirrors, in a rhythm so practiced, it looked like breathing. Michael sat in the passenger seat and watched the city come alive around them, the early morning light hitting buildings that had no idea what was moving through their streets. 7:19 a.m. 4 hours and 11 minutes before Vaughn's attorney consultation. "Talk me through Vasari," Michael said. 62 years old. Started as a government intelligence contractor in the 90s, Hungarian intelligence, then freelance for 3 different European agencies. Moved into private technology acquisition around 2009, when he figured out the money was better and the oversight was worse. Reyes changed lanes without looking. He's not a field operator, he's a broker. But he's smart, he's careful, and he has enough hired muscle that he's never personally touched anything dirty in 15 years. Until now. Until now. Coming to Chicago himself is out of character, which tells me either he's more exposed than we think, or the technology Vaughn was selling him is worth more than we know. Michael processed that. The Meridian schematics. Victoria said they were proprietary. What are they exactly? Reyes glanced at him. You don't know. I mopped floors. Nobody explained the product line. Apex Horizon's core patent is an encryption architecture. Meridian is the next generation of it. If you control that technology, you control the most secure communication infrastructure in about 30% of the American defense contractor ecosystem. A beat. The foreign government Vasari represents has been trying to crack the current generation for 4 years. They couldn't, so they decided to buy the next generation instead. The weight of that settled into the car. Victoria doesn't know this, Michael said. Victoria knows her technology is valuable. She doesn't know this specific national security dimension. That's above her clearance level. Reyes paused. Which is also why Marsh is involved. This stopped being a corporate espionage case the moment that international number showed up on Vaughn's phone. Michael looked out at the city. At the ordinary streets with ordinary people moving through them with no knowledge of what had been in motion around them. How long has Marsh been tracking Vasari? 22 months. She had the shape of his network, but no domestic connection. Vaughn was the piece she was missing. Reyes turned onto a downtown street. You handed her the whole picture last night. I handed her a janitor's observations. You handed her the best field intelligence this operation has produced in 2 years. He said it without emphasis, just factually the way Reyes had always delivered assessments, clean and direct, and carrying no unnecessary weight. Michael said nothing for a moment. Then, the second device. The relay in the third-floor server room. Can Marsh's team use it before Vasari makes contact with Vaughn? That depends on whether Vasari checks the pipeline before he tries to reach Vaughn. If he checks the relay first and it shows a successful transfer, he'll think last night went through. He'll relax. He'll take his time. Reyes pulled to a stop at a light. If he tries to reach Vaughn first, then he knows inside an hour, Michael said, and he's gone. So we need to make sure he checks the relay first. How do we do that? Reyes looked at him. We give him a reason to. The Meridian Hotel occupied the lower 14 floors of a mixed-use tower 2 blocks from the river. The lobby was the kind of lobby that communicated money without announcing it. Neutral colors. Clean lines. The specific silence of a space where every surface absorbs sound rather than reflecting it. Reyes parked on the adjacent street at 7:31 a.m. They sat in the car for a moment. 2 of his people are in the hotel, Reyes said. Vasari runs with a standard 2-person personal security detail. Eastern European, like the contractors at Apex last night, but different network. These 2 are his personal team. Loyal, not just hired. Armed. Almost certainly. Not legally, but yes. Which floor? 12, room 1204, corner room east side. Reyes looked at him. I've had eyes on this building for 6 weeks. Not because I knew Vasari was coming. Because Vasari's operation uses this hotel when they're in Chicago. It's their preferred location. Michael turned to look at him. 6 weeks. I told you, I've been in this for 2 years. And you didn't think to mention to me. I didn't think you were going to be relevant to this part, Reyes said. Last night changed the math. Michael took that in, filed it, let it go. Okay, what's the play? Reyes reached into the backseat and pulled out a small case. He opened it on his lap. Inside was a phone, not his personal phone, a clean one, and a folded piece of paper with what looked like a printed schedule. Vasari's operation uses a verification protocol, Reyes said. Before any major transfer, the receiving party sends a confirmation sequence through the relay. 24 hours after the transfer, the sending party sends a clearance code. If the clearance code doesn't arrive, the receiving party knows something went wrong. The transfer was last night, Michael said. The clearance code would be due tonight. Correct. But if we send the clearance code now early through the relay, Vasari receives a notification that the transfer is confirmed and cleared. He'll know it's early. He'll be suspicious. Yes, which is why the code is accompanied by a message. A message from Vaughn through a channel Vasari recognizes saying there was a security complication at the building last night and they're moving up the clearance timeline as a precaution. Reyes handed Michael the phone. On the screen was the draft message. He receives that message. He thinks Vaughn is being careful. He checks the relay, sees the transfer data, sees the clearance. He relaxes. He thinks the operation succeeded, despite some friction. Michael read the message on the screen. Can he verify this is from Vaughn? He can verify it came through Vaughn's encrypted channel. He can't verify Vaughn sent it personally. Reyes held his eyes. Marsh's technical team spent the last hour setting this up. All we need to do is deliver it. Through the relay. Through the relay, which requires physical proximity to the third-floor server room at Apex Horizon. Reyes looked at Michael. You have a key to the loading dock. Something in the conversation stopped. Michael looked at the key on his personal keychain, the one he'd been carrying for 3 years. The loading dock key for a building he no longer had any official reason to enter. He thought about Victoria, about the drive in her hands, about everything that had happened in that building 12 hours ago. If I go back into that building, he said, Marsh has plausible distance. Marsh has plausible distance either way. But yes, a former employee re-entering a building with an existing key is legally more defensible than a federal agent running an unauthorized technical operation. Former employee, Michael said. You resigned about 3 hours ago, Reyes said. I'm guessing. Michael looked at the phone in his hand, looked at the key. This works, he said slowly. If Vasari receives the message and believes it and checks the relay before 11:30, that's the bet. And if he doesn't, then we move to the direct version, Reyes said simply. They looked at each other. Neither of them asked what the direct version looked like. They both already knew. Michael pulled out his phone and made a call. It rang twice. Victoria picked up. She sounded like someone who had not slept, which was accurate, but she also sounded like someone who was already functioning at full capacity, despite that, which was also accurate. Carter, she said. Reynolds. He paused. I need to come back into the building. A beat. The third-floor server room. Yes. The second device. You knew about it. Diana found it this morning when she was doing a walkthrough with the federal tech team. They told me not to touch it. A pause. I'm guessing you're going to touch it. I'm going to use it. And in return, he thought about how to answer that. In return, the people who ordered the theft of your technology answer for it. Not just Vaughn, the people who sent him. The silence on the line had a quality to it, not hesitation. Assessment. Victoria Reynolds making a fast calculation and arriving at an answer. I'll be in the lobby, she said. She was. When Michael walked through the loading dock at 8:04 a.m. and came through the interior corridor to the main lobby, Victoria was standing near the security desk in the clothes she'd been wearing the night before, which told him she'd gone home and come back without changing, or possibly hadn't gone home at all. She looked at him with that particular focused expression that he'd come to understand in a very short time was her version of composed under pressure. She looked at the man walking next to him. "Who is this?" she said. "Marcus Reyes," Reyes said, offering his hand. "I'm the one who left the note in the supply closet." Victoria looked at his hand, shook it, looked at Michael. "He left the note. He left the note. So you knew who you were when you came in last night?" "No," Michael said. "I didn't know who left it. I knew what it meant. There's a difference." She absorbed this without wasting time on it. "Third floor is clear. The federal team left 40 minutes ago." She started walking. "I told them a building technician needed access for routine infrastructure work. And they believe that. I'm the CEO. They don't question me about my own building." Reyes made a small sound that might have been appreciation. The third-floor server room was cold and loud, and exactly as Michael remembered it. He moved to the northeast rack without hesitating. The relay device was still there, a small black unit slightly different form factor from the drive he'd recovered last night, attached not with tape, but with a magnetic mount to the back of the cooling panel. He looked at it. Reyes moved beside him and pulled out a small device of his own. A tablet connected to a compact transmitter. The kind of equipment that no former Navy SEAL civilian contractor technically should have, but that materializes when people with certain backgrounds maintain certain relationships with certain agencies. 30 seconds, Reyes said. Reyes. He worked. Michael watched the door. Victoria stood near the entrance with her arms crossed and her expression doing the thing it did, fully present, processing everything, filing it. "Done," Reyes said. "Message sent," Michael said. "Sent. Relay shows confirmed transfer and clearance." Vasari's receiving system picked it up. He checked the tablet. 40 seconds ago, which means he's looking at it right now. Michael looked at the clock on his phone. 8:17 a.m. 3 hours and 13 minutes before Vaughn's attorney consultation. "Now we wait," Reyes said. "I hate waiting," Victoria said. "Everyone hates waiting," Michael said. "You do it anyway." She looked at him. "How long?" "If he believes the message, he'll verify through a secondary channel before he does anything else. That takes 15 to 20 minutes. If the secondary channel confirms..." He stopped. His phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. "Marsh." He answered. "Vasari just made contact with his secondary verification channel," Marsh said without preamble. "Our intercept picked it up. He's checking." "He's verifying," Michael said. "Which means he received the message and he's taking it seriously. We have maybe 15 minutes before he either relaxes or escalates." A pause. "Carter, I need you to know something." Her tone had changed. He caught it immediately. "What?" "Vasari made a second call before the verification, 30 seconds ago." She was choosing her words carefully. "He called a number we've been watching for a year. It's a contingency number. The call was 3 seconds long, just a signal, no content." Michael understood what a 3-second call to a contingency number meant. "He has a local asset," Michael said. "Had. We believe so. The contingency call activates a backup operation." Marsh's voice was level, but tight. "We're pulling the number now. We don't know who the asset is yet. But you know what the contingency is. If the primary operation fails, the backup protocol is to secure a leverage point." She paused. "Something Vasari can use to buy himself safe passage out of a failed operation. Something local. Something personal to the parties involved." The server room was cold and loud, and Michael's mind was already 3 steps ahead, running through every variable, every name, every connection that Vasari could have accessed through Vaughn's network. Vaughn had access to Apex Horizon's personnel files. Personnel files contained employee records, emergency contacts, personal information. Michael had worked at Apex Horizon for 3 years. His emergency contact on file was Karen. Karen's address was on file. His mind arrived at the destination before the rest of him caught up, and when it arrived, he was already moving. Marsh, he said. He was walking fast out of the server room into the corridor. My emergency contact at Apex Horizon, Karen Carter. I need you to send someone to her address right now. A half-second pause. Carter. Now Marsh. He was already through the door and moving down the corridor at a pace that was just short of running. He could hear Reyes behind him. What's happening? Victoria said, coming after them both. My sister, Michael said. He pulled out his personal phone. Karen's name. Dialed. The line rang. Once, twice, 3 times. She picked up on the 4th. Hey, what? Karen, listen to me. I need you to take Danny and go to your neighbor's house, right now. Do not ask me why. Do not stop to pack anything. Go now. A beat of silence that felt like it lasted a year. Michael, you're scaring me. I know, I'm sorry. Go, right now. Go to Linda's house next door and lock the door and don't open it for anyone you don't know. Can you do that? Yes, okay. He could hear her already moving. He could hear Biscuit bark at the sudden activity. Michael is Danny. Danny is fine. You're both going to be fine. Go. He hung up, kept moving. Reyes was beside him. Karen's address is in the personnel file, Michael said. I know. If Vaziri activated a contingency. I know, Reyes said. How fast can you get there? 20 minutes, maybe 15. We'll make it 12. Reyes looked at him with an expression that was absolutely steady. Not calm steady. There's a difference. Calm is the absence of feeling. Steady is feeling everything and not letting it make the decisions. She'll be okay, Michael. You don't know that. No, but I know you, and you don't panic, and your sister didn't raise herself. She's smart. They hit the loading dock at a controlled run. Behind them, Victoria Reynolds called out, Carter. He stopped, turned. She was standing in the corridor, phone in hand. Her expression was something complicated, professional concern and personal urgency, layered in a way that most people wouldn't have been able to maintain under the circumstances. I'm sending my head of security with you, she said. And I'm calling the police directly, not through the building, my personal contact on the force. She was already dialing. Go. He went. Reyes drove at a speed that was technically illegal in all 50 states, and did it with the specific precision of someone who understands the difference between fast and dangerous and has permanently located himself on the fast side of that line. Michael sat with his phone in his hand and watched the city blur past and controlled his breathing and did not think about the worst outcomes. He had been trained to not think about worst outcomes in motion. You think about what you can do. You think about the next step. You think about what's in front of you. What was in front of him was Karen's street. 9 minutes away, then 8, then 7. His phone rang. Unknown number. He answered. Carter. A voice he didn't recognize. Male. Accented Eastern European, the same school as the contractors last night. Controlled and professional. I have your sister's address. Michael said nothing. I also have a very simple proposal, the voice continued. You have something that belongs to my employer. The drive your federal friends recovered last night. I understand it's now in official custody, which makes recovery complicated. However, a pause. Your employer's technology exists in more places than one drive. Your access to that building's technical infrastructure, what you did this morning, tells my employer that you could provide an alternative. Michael's jaw tightened. You want me to hand you access to Apex Horizon systems. A one-time connection, 30 seconds, enough for my employer to extract what he came for. In exchange for my family. In exchange for the understanding that my employer has no interest in your personal life. The car was 6 minutes from Karen's street. Reyes was listening to everything. His expression hadn't changed. Michael thought for exactly 3 seconds. Okay, he said. The voice paused. Surprised maybe that it had been that easy. Good. You'll receive instructions. I have one condition, Michael said. You're not in a position to... I want to talk to my sister, right now, her voice, or this conversation ends. Silence. Then Karen's voice tightly controlled Michael. You okay? There's a man outside the house, Linda's. He knocked on the door. Her voice was steady. He had never loved her more in his life than he did in that moment. I didn't open it. Good girl. He kept his voice level. Is Danny with you? Yes, he's right here. Tell him his dad says he's doing great. Michael. I'm 4 minutes away, he said, not into the phone, but to Reyes, and Reyes pressed the accelerator down another degree. Back into the phone. Are you still there? The voice came back. Yes, your condition is met. Instructions. I said one condition. I have a second one. Carter. The second condition is that your employer comes to collect personally. He paused. Vasari. Tell him I want him there. A longer silence. That's not. Tell him, if he wants what he came to Chicago for, he comes himself. Otherwise, the drive and everything on it gets released to the national security press at noon. I have that capability. He can check if he wants. He said it the way he said everything in situations like this, without heat, without urgency, just fact delivered at room temperature. The line went dead. 30 seconds. Then a different voice. Older. More careful. Mr. Carter. Orrin Vasari spoke English the way men of his generation and background spoke English formally, with precision, every word placed. You're an interesting person. I've heard that, Michael said. The access you're offering, through the relay, that would give us the Meridian architecture. Yes. Why would you do that? For my family. You were a SEAL, Vasari said. A commander. You don't trade national security for a personal stake. I was a commander, Michael said. I'm a father. Another silence. Vasari working his calculus. Michael could almost hear it, the specific sound a careful man makes when he's evaluating risk and reward and the reliability of the person offering the deal. Reyes turned onto Karen Street. 1 minute out. My man outside your sister's house will move away, Vasari said. As a gesture. When I verify the access, not how it works, Michael said. You come here, you verify nothing remotely. The access is physical. You come, you see it happen, and then we're done. You're asking me to walk into. I'm asking you to stand on a sidewalk in front of a residential house in a neighborhood where nobody knows who you are, and watch me complete a technical operation that gives you what you flew to Chicago to get. A pause. Or don't come. And I call Agent Marsh and tell her the relay is still active, and she dismantles your network from the inside out. Another pause. Your choice. You have 2 minutes. He hung up. Reyes pulled to the curb 4 houses down from Karen's. He looked at Michael. He'll come, Michael said. I know, Reyes said. That's the problem. I need you on the north side of the street. Already. He'll have one or both of his people with him. I know. The man outside Karen's. I see him. Reyes had already clocked the figure at the end of the block, the specific way a person stands when they're trying to look like they're not standing watch. I'll move him. Don't. I won't. Reyes met his eyes. Go get your sister. Michael got out of the car. He walked to Linda's door, knocked twice in the specific pattern that Danny sometimes used as a joke. 3 fast, 2 slow, because he needed Karen to know it was him before she opened the door. It opened in 4 seconds. Karen looked at him. She was pale, but steady. Behind her, Danny was on the couch with Biscuit pressed against him, and he looked up when Michael appeared and said, Dad, in a voice that was trying to sound normal and wasn't quite succeeding, and Michael thought it was possible. That was the best and worst sound he had ever heard in his life. Hey, buddy, Michael said. His voice was completely even. Everything's okay. There was a man outside, Danny said. I know, he's gone now. Danny looked at him with the 8-year-old version of a hard look, the same calculation behind the eyes that Michael sometimes saw in the mirror. How do you know he's gone? Because I asked a friend to take care of it. What kind of friend? An old one. Michael looked at Karen. Are you okay? I'm furious, she said. Which is different from not okay. She looked past him at the street. What's happening out there, Michael? "What is all of this?" "It's almost over," he said. "I need you to stay inside for about 20 more minutes. Then it's done." 20 minutes. Maybe less. Karen looked at him for a long moment. "You better not get shot." "I'm not going to get shot." "You don't know that." "Karen." "Fine. Go. 20 minutes." She pointed at him. "Not a second more." He went back to the street. At 9:43 a.m. Oren Vaziri arrived on foot, which told Michael the man was careful and smart because arriving by car created a record with one of his people, not both, which told Michael the second one had been sent somewhere else as a contingency to the contingency. That was professional. That was what you'd expect from someone who'd been running operations for 30 years. Vaziri was exactly what his photograph suggested. Well-dressed, controlled the composed surface of a man who has spent decades making sure no one could read him. He stopped 6 feet from Michael on the sidewalk. His single visible security person stopped 2 feet behind his left shoulder. Michael was alone, or appeared to be. "Mr. Carter," Vaziri said. "Mr. Vaziri." Michael looked at him. "You came." The offer was interesting. He looked at the street, at the houses, the absolute ordinariness of it. "You live here." "My sister does." "And you're willing to compromise your country's security for your sister." "I told you, I'm a father, a brother." Michael looked at him. "That means more than the rest of it." Vaziri studied him. The assessment was professional and thorough and took about 4 seconds. "The access. How does it work?" "The relay in Apex Horizon's server room is still active. I need to be physically present to authorize the connection. When I do, a 30-second window opens, enough for your receiving system to pull the Meridian architecture. And you'll do this now. If you give me your word that your man walks away from this street and doesn't come back." Vaziri almost smiled. Almost. "The word of a man in my position. The word of a professional," Michael said, "who understands that burning an asset is bad for future business." Vaziri looked at him for 3 seconds. "Agreed." He reached into his jacket pocket, and Michael's entire body went perfectly still, and then relaxed when the hand came back out with a phone. Vaziri held it up, said something in Hungarian. The security person behind him shifted. Vaziri said another word, decisive. The security person nodded and walked away down the block. Vaziri put the phone away. "Good," he said. "Shall we go?" "One more thing," Michael said. Something moved across Vaziri's face. A flicker. The professional patience of a man who has learned to manage surprises without showing them. "Yes. The relay needs a physical authorization code. From me in person, registered against my biometrics." Michael looked at him. "Which means it needs to happen in the building. Which means you need to come with me." "That's not what was agreed." "That's what's required," Michael said. "The system won't accept a remote trigger. It was set up that way by your people, not mine. Physical presence was always required. I'm guessing whoever briefed you didn't mention that detail." He held Vaziri's gaze. "Or they did mention it, and you were planning to handle that part separately." The calculation behind Vaziri's eyes was visible for exactly 1 second before he put it back behind the surface. "Very well," Vaziri said. He said it the way men say things when they've already decided the next move, and the words are just performance. Michael heard Reyes's voice through the earpiece he'd put in before leaving the car, the smallest of sounds, almost nothing. "I'm on him." They walked. At 10:02 a.m. Michael Carter walked Oren Vaziri through the front entrance of Apex Horizon Technologies. Reyes was somewhere behind them at a distance that maintained plausible separation. Vaziri's second security person, the contingency he'd sent somewhere else, was being managed by 2 federal agents who had materialized in the last 20 minutes in the way federal assets materialize when Agent Marsh decides the management window has closed. In the elevator, Vaziri was quiet, watchful. He was reading the situation the way experienced operators read situations constantly from multiple angles, checking for the seam where the story doesn't hold. Michael stood next to him and looked at the numbers climbing. 3, 4, 5. "You know," Vaziri said, not looking at him. In 30 years, I've met very few people who actually surprised me. Is that so? Michael said. The janitor story, the cover, the patience. He paused. You were never going to give me the access. No, Michael said. The elevator stopped at the 12th floor. The doors opened. Agent Marsh was standing in the corridor with 4 federal agents, and the specific expression of a person who has been waiting for this moment for 22 months and is experiencing the professional satisfaction of watching a door close. Vasari looked at the corridor, looked at Michael. Something moved across his face, not anger. Something older and more complicated. The expression of a man who has played this game for 30 years and has just discovered that he was playing it today against someone who was better. The biometrics were never real, he said. No, Michael said. The relay message this morning. Sent to give you a reason to verify before calling Vaughn. Give Marsh time to position. Vasari was quiet for 3 seconds. Then very quietly. The note in the supply closet. That was your network. That was a friend, Michael said. Vasari looked at him with something that was not quite respect and not quite resentment, and landed somewhere between the two in the complicated territory where men who've built their lives on professional opposition acknowledge each other. I came to Chicago myself, he said. I never come in person. I know, Michael said. That's what I was counting on. Agent Marsh stepped forward. Mr. Vasari, my name is Agent Marsh. We've been wanting to have this conversation for some time. Vasari looked at her, at the agents behind her, at the corridor ahead of him. He looked at Michael one last time. The father story, he said. Was that real? Michael looked at him. Thought about Danny on the couch with Biscuit pressed against him trying to sound normal and not quite succeeding, saying Dad in that voice that was both 8 years old and something older. Every word, Michael said. Vasari nodded slowly. Then he straightened his jacket, which was the gesture of a man who has decided that whatever comes next, he will meet it standing. He stepped forward into the corridor. The doors closed. Michael stood alone in the elevator. He took a slow breath in. He let it out. His ribs hurt. The hit from last night, the one he'd filed away and promised himself he'd feel tomorrow, had arrived on schedule. He put one hand against the elevator wall and breathed through it. His phone buzzed. Reyes. Clean, Reyes said. Both of his people are in custody. Marsh has everything she needs. The network. With Vasari in hand and the relay data, she has enough to dismantle the whole structure. 6 months of legal work, but she has it. A pause. It's over, Michael. Michael stood in the elevator. It's over. 3 words that should have landed clean and didn't quite, because the over he was standing in wasn't the same over he'd been living in for 3 years. This one had doors opening, not closing. This one had weight coming off rather than weight being added. This one had Marcus Reyes alive and on the other end of a phone, and a son on a couch in Spider-Man socks who had said Dad in a voice that meant everything. He pressed the lobby button. He had 20 minutes to get back to Karen's house. He'd told her not a second more. He rode the elevator down and walked out of the building into the morning, and for the first time in a very long time, the city felt like a place he was allowed to be in. He made it back to Karen's street in 18 minutes. Not 20. 18. Because he had told her 20, and he had meant it. And there are certain promises a man makes to his family that he keeps not because someone is checking, but because those promises are the architecture of everything he's trying to build. Karen opened the door before he knocked. She looked at him, the full scan top to bottom, the same way she'd looked at him since they were kids, and he came home from something checking for damage before she said anything else. He let her do it. He stood on the step and let his sister look at him. Ribs, she said. Just bruised. How do you know? I know what broken feels like. She held the door wider. Get in here. Danny was off the couch the moment Michael walked through the door. Not running, he was 8, not 4, but moving with that contained urgency that children deploy when they've been scared and are relieved and are trying not to show either too completely. He walked up to his father and stood in front of him and looked up. Are you actually okay? Danny said. I'm actually okay. You said that on the phone this morning too. And I was right then as well. Danny studied him with those eyes that saw too much and always had. There was a man outside Linda's house. I know, he's gone. Where'd he go? Somewhere he's going to be for a long time, Michael said. He crouched down so he was at Danny's level. His ribs protested the movement, and he didn't show it. Hey, look at me. Danny looked at him. You were good today. You stayed calm. You listened to your aunt. I was scared, Danny said, like admitting it was a tactical risk he'd decided to take. That's okay. Being scared is okay. What matters is what you do while you're scared. Michael held his son's eyes. You did fine. Something shifted in Danny's face. The 8-year-old version of processing something that is bigger than 8 years old, filing it into a category that doesn't quite exist yet. Dad, he said. Yeah. What do you actually do at work? The question landed like a stone in still water. Michael held his son's gaze. I thought about 3 years of diagonal toast and ceiling cracks, and the particular weight of a mop handle, and the practiced invisibility of a man who decided that the safest place to hide was in plain sight. He thought about the note in the supply closet. He thought about Reyes alive 20 minutes away for 3 years, watching over him from a distance, because he needed time to find out if he could be something other than what they made him. He thought about what he was now. I used to think that was a simple question, Michael said. But it's not. What I do, what I've always been able to do, is protect people. I spent a long time trying to stop doing that because it cost me things I couldn't get back. He paused. And then I figured out that stopping wasn't the answer. Using it differently was. Danny thought about this with the focused seriousness that made him simultaneously the easiest and hardest person to talk to in Michael's life. So you're going to keep doing it? I think so, yes. The protecting people part? Yes. Good, Danny said. And then because he was 8 and 8-year-olds have a metabolic need to return to normal after emotional territory. Can we get pizza tonight? Michael laughed. The rib hurt, and he didn't care. Yeah, buddy, we can get pizza. Karen, standing in the kitchen doorway with her arms crossed and her expression doing about 6 things at once, made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh and wasn't quite crying, and was exactly what it sounded like when a woman who has been holding her breath for 3 years finally exhales. At 11:15 a.m., Michael's phone rang. Victoria Reynolds. He stepped into the narrow back hallway of Karen's house to take it. It's done, Victoria said. Her voice had a quality he hadn't heard in it before. Not relief exactly, something more complicated. The sound of someone standing at the end of something very large and trying to figure out what the view looks like from there. Agent Marsh just called me. Vasari is in federal custody. The network is being dismantled. Vaughn's attorney arrived for the consultation at 11:30 and left at 11:32 when he was informed his client had been moved to federal jurisdiction. A pause. I also just received a briefing from a person who identified themselves only as a national security consultant about the actual scope of what was at stake. The Meridian architecture. The defense contractor implications. Her voice was careful. I didn't know. I know you didn't, Michael said. I should have known. It was my technology, my company. Not self-pity, self-assessment, clean and direct. I was so focused on the internal threat that I missed the larger picture. You identified the internal threat, Michael said. Nobody handed that to you. You built the case against Vaughn yourself over 9 months. The larger picture was classified. You couldn't have known it because you weren't supposed to. A pause. You're being generous. I'm being accurate. He leaned against the wall. How's Diana? A short sound, genuine surprised. She's giving her 3rd statement to federal agents and appears to be enjoying the organizational challenge of coordinating their scheduling. A beat. She's remarkable. Yes, Michael said. She is. Silence for a moment. The kind of silence that means something is coming. Carter, Victoria said. The offer I made you. Head of Security Operations. He had expected this. He had been thinking about it since she made it in the car with Reyes in the elevator, with Vasari in the 18-minute drive back to Karen Street. He had turned it over from every angle, and he understood what it was and what it wasn't, and what he needed it to be before he could say yes. "I need to tell you something first," he said. "Okay. I'm not the same person I was before. The person I was before the operator, the SEAL, the man who ran classified missions. He's in there, but he's not all of me anymore. I have a son. I have a life that's not this. Whatever role I take, those things are not secondary. They're not negotiable. I would never ask them to be. And I'm going to continue working with Marcus Reyes, consultatively, with people like Agent Marsh. There will be times when that overlaps with my work at Apex Horizon in ways that I can't fully predict or control." A pause. "Is that a warning or a disclosure?" "Both," he said. "Fair enough." She was quiet for a moment. "Carter, when you walked into that conference room last night, and I've been thinking about this, you weren't just protecting me. You were protecting the people in that building, the technology, the employees who don't know any of this happened." A pause. "That's a particular kind of person. Not just someone who can handle the tactical side. Someone who understands what's actually worth protecting and why." She paused. "I want that person running my security. The whole version. Father operator, whatever else comes with it. All of it." Michael stood in his sister's back hallway and looked at the wall and thought about 3 years of choosing invisibility. About the moment he'd opened that conference room door, still pushing his cleaning cart, and everyone had laughed. About what it felt like when the sharpening happened, when the world narrowed down to angles and distances, and the particular clarity that comes when you stop pretending to be less than you are. "All right," he said. "All right? Yes, I'll take the position." He heard something in her exhale that he recognized from the night before, not relief. Resolution. The sound of someone who has been in motion toward something and has arrived. "Good," she said. "I'll have HR send the formal offer by end of day. And Carter?" "Yeah. Thank you. For last night. For this morning. For 3 years of paying attention to things the rest of us missed." A beat. "I don't know if I would have survived last night without you." "You would have," he said. "You're not the kind of person who doesn't survive." Another pause. "That might be the nicest thing anyone's said to me in a while." "Don't get used to it," he said. "I'm going to be a difficult employee." She laughed. It was a real one, brief surprise, genuine. "I'm counting on it," she said, and hung up. He stood in the hallway for a moment. Then he went back to the kitchen where Danny was explaining to Karen with great intensity why the pizza needed to come from, specifically one restaurant and not the other 3 that were closer, and Karen was making the face she made when she was pretending to argue about something she'd already decided. Michael leaned in the doorway and watched his family. He thought about Reyes. About the fact that there was a conversation still ahead of them, a real one, not the operational briefing of the morning, not the compressed exchange between 2 people moving toward a deadline. A real conversation about 6 years and what they had both been carrying and what it meant that they were both still standing. That conversation was going to take time. It was going to be the kind of conversation that doesn't finish in one sitting. But it was there. It was real. And that was enough for now. He called Reyes at 12:30 p.m. "It's done," Michael said. "I know," Reyes said. "Marsh texted." "She texted you?" "We text sometimes. She's surprisingly funny in texts." Michael shook his head. "I took the job." A beat. "Victoria Reynolds' offer?" "Yes." Silence. Not empty silence, the kind that has weight and shape and means something. "Good," Reyes said finally. "I'm going to need you to stop managing my life from a distance. I stopped the moment you walked into that conference room." "Reyes." "Michael. I mean it. No more interference. No more interference with background checks. No more watching from across the neighborhood." "Understood. If you want to know how I am, you call me." "Understood." A pause. "You could also," Michael said carefully, "come to dinner sometime. Karen makes—" "I know what Karen makes," Reyes said. "I've been 20 minutes away for 3 years. How do you know what she makes?" "She has a food blog." Michael stared at the wall. "My sister has a food blog." It has 40,000 followers. Her pot roast post got shared 31,000 times. A pause. She's quite good. Michael put his hand over his face. Sunday, he said when he recovered. Come to dinner Sunday. I'll bring wine, Reyes said. You don't have to. I'll bring wine, Reyes said again, firm. It's been 6 years. I'm bringing wine. He hung up. 2 weeks passed. The kind of 2 weeks that are both completely ordinary and fundamentally different from everything before them. Danny went back to school. Michael drove him in the mornings in the truck with the loud exhaust that he had now actually scheduled to be fixed, which Danny had greeted with an amount of enthusiasm that suggested he had cared about the exhaust issue for some time without saying so. Karen went back to her normal life with Phil and the kids and Biscuit, and she texted Michael approximately every 36 hours to confirm he was in one piece, which he answered every time without complaint, because she had earned that, and he knew it. On the first Monday of the new position, Michael Carter walked into Apex Horizon Technologies through the front entrance. Not the loading dock, the front entrance. He wore a jacket, not a uniform. His name was not stitched above his pocket. He took the elevator to the 40th floor, and when the doors opened he stepped out into the corridor. He had mopped 1,000 times, and he walked it as something different. People moved out of his way without being asked to, not fearfully. Just with the specific awareness that people develop when someone with a certain quality moves through a space. Diana was at her desk when he came through. She looked up and gave him the precise, competent nod of a person who has processed extraordinary events and returned to excellent professional function. "Good morning," she said. "Victoria's ready for you. Also," she held up a folder. "I've prepared a preliminary security audit of all 4 floors, identified 14 vulnerabilities in the current camera positioning, and 3 gaps in the after-hours access protocol." She held it out. "I thought you'd want to start there." Michael took the folder, looked at it, looked at her. "When did you do this?" "Last week, while you were doing your onboarding paperwork." A pause. "I assumed that's what you'd prioritize." "It is. I also." She opened her desk drawer and pulled out a small printed document. "I pulled the maintenance logs for the northeast security camera on this floor, the one that was repositioned. I found that it was adjusted manually, not by the system on a Tuesday evening 6 weeks ago, between 8 p.m. and 8:15 p.m. The access log shows the adjustment was made using Vaughn's secondary access code." She set it down. "I thought you'd want the timeline." Michael looked at the document, then at Diana. "Have you ever thought about working in security?" he said. She met his eyes without blinking. "I've been thinking about it for about a week," she said. "Specifically, the operational intelligence side." "Come talk to me this afternoon," he said. Something moved in her expression, controlled, professional, but genuine. "Yes, sir." He walked to Victoria's office. She was on the phone when he appeared in the doorway, and she held up one finger 1 second and finished the call in about 20 words and hung up with the focused efficiency of someone who has made a decision about how they use their time and enforces it. "Carter," she said. "Reynolds." She looked at the folder under his arm. "Diana got to you already. She did a full security audit last week." "I know. I asked her to." He stopped. "You asked her to. I thought you'd want a foundation to work from, and Diana is..." She paused. "Diana notices things. I've known that for 2 years. I've been underusing her." "Not anymore," Michael said. "No." She stood, came around the desk, looked at him directly the way she had in the conference room that night, straight on, nothing managed. "How are you?" The question was simple. The way she asked it made it mean more than the words. "Better," he said. And it was true. Not perfect, not finished, not the clean resolution of something that had been complicated for a very long time. But better, genuinely, specifically better in the way that things become when a man stops fighting the truth of who he is and starts using it for something real. "The rib," she said. "Mostly healed." "Mostly." "It's fine." She looked at him for another second. "Reyes," she said. "Is he..." He's consulting, informally. He'll be in and out. Michael looked at her. You'll know when he's here. Will I? Probably not, he admitted. But that's the point. She almost smiled. Fair enough. She looked at the window, the city beyond it, the same view that people paid millions to occupy, the same view that had witnessed from 40 floors up and behind reinforced glass, a night that none of them would fully process for a very long time. There's something I've been thinking about, she said. What? The 3 years you were here, before everything. She turned back to him. Was there ever one moment where you almost walked away? Where you almost just let it go and stayed invisible? I thought about it honestly. About Tuesday nights in the supply closet. About the drive home after hearing Vaughn in the stairwell. About Danny asking why he always looked sad. About the parking lot outside Karen's house and the yellow light through the window and the 8-year-old with his arms spread wide on the couch. Yes, he said, more than once. What stopped you? He looked at her. You did, he said. Not you specifically. The fact that you were real. The fact that what you built was real and what they were going to do to it was wrong and there was nobody else positioned to stop it. He paused. I've spent a long time telling myself I chose the quiet life because it was better for Danny. And part of that was true. But part of it was that I was afraid not of danger. I was never afraid of that, of what it meant if I came back. Of whether I could be both things. Whether I could be the father and the protector and not have one destroy the other. Victoria was quiet. Can you? She asked. I'm finding out, he said. So far, the answer is yes. She held his eyes for a moment, with that expression he'd come to understand, the one that processes everything and shows nothing except intelligence and intent. Then she nodded once in the way she nodded when something was decided. All right, she said. Let's get to work. Reyes came to dinner on Sunday. He brought a bottle of red wine that Phil immediately declared was above his pay grade and poured with great care. Anyway, and he sat at Karen's kitchen table in the ordinary warm chaos of a family Sunday dinner, with biscuit under the table, hoping for dropped food, and Phil talking about Little League, and Karen's kids running through the house, and Karen herself moving between the stove and the table with the specific orchestral competence of someone who has been feeding people in this kitchen for years. Michael sat across from Reyes. They didn't talk about operations. They didn't talk about hollow ground or Vassery, or the network being dismantled somewhere in federal legal machinery. They talked about the years. About the ordinary things that had filled the space of 6 years for both of them. Reyes had learned to cook. Actually cook, not just survive during his recovery. And he and Karen got into a 20-minute conversation about braising technique that Michael watched with the particular quality of attention he brought to things that mattered, without his fully understanding why they mattered. Danny sat at the table and ate and watched Reyes with the focused assessment of an 8-year-old trying to determine where a new person fits. About halfway through dinner, Danny said, "Are you the friend who moved the man away from Linda's house?" The table went quiet for a half-second. Reyes looked at Danny. "Yes," he said. "I am." Danny chewed, considered. "How?" "I asked him to leave," Reyes said simply. "And he just left. He was persuaded." Danny thought about this. "My dad can do that too," he said. "Persuade people." "I know," Reyes said. "I taught him." Danny looked at his father. "You know this guy?" "For a long time," Michael said. "Why didn't I know about him?" "It's a long story." "How long?" "About 6 years." Danny's eyes went between his father and Reyes with the rapid back and forth of an 8-year-old recalibrating. Then he looked at Reyes. "Are you going to come back?" Reyes looked at Michael. Michael looked at Reyes. 6 years of loss and distance and silence, and a man who had been 20 minutes away the whole time, watching from the edges, making sure the spaces stayed open. 6 years of a life Michael had built in the shape of his own grief, and the morning he had finally stopped pretending it was enough, and everything that had moved since then, fast and irreversible and still moving. "Yeah," Reyes said, looking back at Danny. "I'm going to come back." Danny nodded with the gravity of someone filing this under established fact. "Good," he said. "You can come next Sunday too. My dad makes terrible pot roast." "I do not," Michael said. "Aunt Karen says you do." "Aunt Karen is?" He looked at Karen. "Accurate," Karen said without looking up from her plate. Phil laughed. Reyes laughed. The kids came back through the kitchen and were shooed back out. Biscuit found something under the table and thumped his tail against the floor. The wine was poured again. Michael Carter sat at his sister's kitchen table on an ordinary Sunday evening and looked at the people around it and felt something he hadn't felt in so long. He had to sit with it for a moment before he could name it. Not happiness exactly. Happiness was too simple for what this was. This was more complicated and more real. This was the specific texture of a life that is actually being lived with weight and warmth and difficulty and people and all the things a person tries to cut away when they decide that invisible is easier than present. He had cut all of it away once. He had believed that the cost of being seen was higher than the cost of disappearing. He had been wrong. Not about the danger. The danger was real. The cost was real. He had lost people he loved in a country that doesn't appear on any official map, and that loss did not go away, and was never going to go away completely. He would carry Reyes's death. The death he now knew was not a death for the rest of his life, not as weight, but as memory, the kind that changes shape over time, from wound to watermark. But the choice to disappear had been wrong, because disappearing doesn't protect the people you love. It just makes you absent from their lives while the danger finds them anyway. It finds Karen's address in a personnel file. It finds your son on a couch in a house on a street you thought was safe because you chose a quiet job and a ceiling crack and diagonal toast, and told yourself that was enough. Presence protects people. Not distance. Not invisibility. Not a mop and a uniform, and 3 years of lying to yourself about who you are. Presence. After dinner, he and Reyes stood on Karen's back step in the cool night air while the kitchen cleared behind them. The city was out there somewhere, its noise and motion and ordinary machinery, but at this distance, it was just a low background hum. "Thank you," Michael said. Reyes didn't ask for what. He understood the full scope of what was being thanked. "Don't thank me," he said. "You did it. Every part of it. You left the note. You found it. You stayed close. You stayed standing." Reyes looked at him. "Carter, I spent 3 years watching you carry something that wasn't yours to carry alone, and wanting to say so, and knowing the timing wasn't right. And I was right about the timing. You needed to arrive at last Tuesday on your own feet, not because I walked you there." He paused. "But I want you to know if I could have told you sooner that hollow ground wasn't your fault, I would have. I would have told you the day the classification lifted." "I know," Michael said. "Do you actually know, or are you saying that Michael thought about it? About the weight he had redistributed in the last 2 weeks? Not removed, redistributed. Into its correct shape. Into the understanding that some things you carry are yours, and some things you've been carrying belong to other people, and the work of a lifetime is learning the difference." "I actually know," he said. Reyes looked at him for a moment. Then he nodded once in the specific way that meant something was real and acknowledged and done. They stood in the quiet for another minute. "The position at Apex Horizon," Reyes said. "Marsh is going to want your team to interface with her operation periodically." "I figured." "She'll make it seem optional. It won't be optional." "I figured that too." "You're okay with it." "I'm okay with it." He looked out at the night. "I'm okay with most of it, actually. The work. The purpose. The fact that what I know how to do is useful for something real." He paused. "I just needed it to be on terms I could stand behind. And now it is. Now it is." Reyes was quiet for a moment. Then, "Your pot roast really is terrible. Don't you start." "I'm just saying. I could show you." "Reyes. It's a technique issue. The braising liquid." "Marcus." Reyes stopped, looked at him, the ghost of a smile at the edge of his mouth. "Yeah. Shut up about the pot roast." The smile broke through. "Next Sunday, Reyes said. "I'll show you." "You're not cooking in my kitchen." "We'll negotiate." He went inside to get his jacket. Michael stayed on the step for another minute alone. The night was quiet. The city hummed. Somewhere in the house behind him, Danny was arguing with Karen about whether Biscuit was allowed on the good couch, which was a long-running constitutional argument in this household, with no sign of resolution. Phil was washing dishes and talking to Reyes about baseball, which was going to take a long time, because Phil had opinions about baseball that were thorough and comprehensive, and he expressed them to anyone who stood still long enough. Normal, real, his. Michael Carter stood on his sister's back step and breathed in the cool night air and understood finally completely, without the defensive layer of a man still fighting himself, that the choice in front of him had never been between the warrior and the father. It had always been whether he was brave enough to be both. 3 years ago he had chosen the mop because he thought the braver choice was the quieter one. He had been wrong about that. The brave choice, the genuinely terrifying choice that required everything a man has to give, was to stand in the light and be exactly what you are, and trust that the people who matter can hold all of it at once. Danny could hold all of it. Karen could hold all of it. Reyes, who had apparently known all along, had been holding it from 20 minutes away for 3 years. And in a glass-walled office on the 40th floor of a building that Michael Carter had once mopped at midnight, Victoria Reynolds was holding it too in her own way, because she was the kind of person who sees the real thing when it's standing in front of her, even when it's wearing a janitor's uniform. He had been seen. He had let himself be seen. That was the beginning of everything. He turned and went back inside into the warm noise of his sister's kitchen, into the argument about Biscuit and the baseball opinions, and the wine that Phil was drinking with excessive reverence, and his son, who would ask him in about 10 minutes if he wanted to watch something before bed. He went back inside and sat down at the table and poured himself another half glass of wine and said, "Biscuits allowed on the back couch," which settled nothing but made Danny look at him with the pure, uncomplicated gratitude of a child who has gotten an unexpected tactical ally in an ongoing domestic dispute. "Thank you," Danny said. "Don't thank me," Michael said. "Thank the fact that I'm in a good mood." "Why are you in a good mood?" He looked at his son. At the face that held all the best parts of everything he'd managed to build in spite of himself. At the 8 years of stubborn, curious, endlessly surprising humanity that had needed him to be present and had waited patiently while he figured out how. "Because I'm home," Michael said. Danny considered this. "You're always home after dinner." "I mean home the other way," Michael said. Danny thought about it for a second with that focused 8-year-old seriousness. Then something shifted in his expression, not understanding exactly, but the shape of it. The sense of a kid who doesn't have all the words yet, but has the instinct for what the words mean. "Okay," Danny said. "Good." And that was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything a man who has spent 3 years running from himself needs to hear when he finally completely, irrevocably stops running. Michael Carter was home. Not the apartment with the ceiling crack. Not the building with the mop. Not the invisible life built inside the edges of a grief he had carried like it was earned. Home in the only way that lasts. The way that doesn't require a quiet job or an invisible life, or the pretense that a man can cut away what he is and still be whole. The greatest warriors are not always the ones standing in the spotlight. That part was true. But the real truth, the one beneath it, the one that takes longer to reach, is that the bravest thing a warrior can do is not the operation in the dark. Not the conference room, or the hotel, or the 48-hour window, or the calculated walk into danger with a cleaning cart and a plan, and the whole weight of his history bearing down. The bravest thing Michael Carter ever did was sit down at his sister's kitchen table on a Sunday night and let the people who loved him see exactly who he was. All of it. Every part. And